need be. Mr. Given, is there anyone that is not present that you were expecting? Nope.
No, your
All
worship.
right, thank you. Good morning, all. I'll call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for April 20th. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda?
Your worship,
Given.
if you wish, I could provide a brief presentation, potentially under 4.1 CAO COVID situational update, if council would like to hear that.
I see nods. That meets with approval. If someone could propose a motion to amend the agenda to include a CAO COVID presentation.
I would make that motion.
Councillor Keller-Harampe, thank you. Any other changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda? All right, I will call the question on Councillor Keller-Harampe's motion that we add a CAO report on an update of the COVID situation as agenda item 4.1. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And might I have a motion then to approve the agenda as amended? Thank you, Councillor Journeau. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of April 6th have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If not, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of April 6th, 2021 as presented? Councillor Demota, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And that takes us to our new agenda item, 4.1, presentations. Mr. Given, thank you for suggesting that you do that.
Sure. Thank you, Worship. I'll be very brief, Council. This isn't a formal ECC update, but there has been a request for more information. Over the last couple of weeks, we have seen COVID cases rising in the community, but I can report that as of this morning, Alberta Health Services is actually reporting that we're down to 23 current cases from our previous 27. So that's maybe a slight pause in the trend, or at least a reversal for a period of time. But it does speak to the fact that the community continues to need to be vigilant about following public health orders. There is, I think, some increased concern with the increased amount of activity. I think people are feeling that we're getting towards the end, which certainly we are. But administration still advises the community that they need to do their best to comply with the current public health orders that are in place. Council is likely aware that the province of Alberta announced just yesterday that they have lowered the age for people to qualify for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Alberta Health Services has a very simple and easy to use online booking tool. So we would encourage anyone in the community who meets the criteria that are established by Alberta Health Services for vaccine appointments to take advantage of those appointments that are available in the community. And then also, I just wanted to note to Council that we were able to post some additional advocacy materials and public information material to the municipal Facebook page and social media channels yesterday. Mayor Ireland participated with the mayors of a number of other communities, including Edmonton and Calgary. And I believe Mayor Ireland may have had some leadership in pulling together the mayors of the mountain communities to speak directly to all Albertans about the need for following public health regulations as we close out this pandemic. Mayor Ireland, I think you looked particularly good with the mountain backdrop in that video. And I just wanted to note that the video did actually get exposure by Dr. Hinshaw. And so I think it shows that our voice is being heard by Albertans, not just in Jasper, but across the province. And I just wanted to bring that to Council attention, that the municipality was able to share Mayor Ireland's work through our municipal channels. But it's also getting much broader reach. than we might have been able to do just on our own as just Jasper. And Your Worship, that's all I wanted to do in terms of an update for this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Given. It's very much appreciated. And yes, I hope that others in the community and across the province are seeing that video and taking seriously that message. And I credit Mayor Iveson and Mayor Scott in the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo primarily, but it was done in concert with Alberta Health Services. And I was able to provide an opportunity for the mayors of the other mountain communities to get engaged in that, which I think really helps accentuate the message that we're trying to give out here. So I appreciate that. And I must credit the lessons I learned from Amanda Stevens of our organization to figure out how to do a video on my own. But I too was pleased with the results. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Mr. Given regarding that update? All right, I see nothing. So thanks again, Mr. Given. Agenda item 5, business arising from previous minutes. Is there any business arising either from the minutes of April 6th or other minutes? If not, we can move to agenda item 6, department reports. We have nothing scheduled, and as nothing has been said, we will consider that complete. Agenda item 7, bylaws summary, is just there for information. There are no bylaws to consider, which takes us to agenda number item 8, request for decision. And first on that, we have the property tax receivable matter. 8.1, Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. Council saw this last week at Council Committee of the Whole, so a very, very brief introduction. Administration is recommending that Council approve the write-off of property tax receivable in the amount of $22,743.92. This is reflective of a change in provincial policy. This is essentially property tax that is levied on the provincial building. We had in the past received a grant in lieu of property tax from the province of Alberta that was equal to the amount of tax that was levied. The province has made a fiscal policy choice that they are no longer going to be paying municipalities the full amount of property tax on provincial buildings. And while it is not satisfactory, I would advise that it is administration's recommendation that we do need to appropriately reflect this in our financial accounting to demonstrate that this is an amount that is not likely recoverable. And so therefore, administration is recommending that council approve the write-off for this amount from the year previous.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Are there any further questions for Mr. Given or administration regarding the request? And if not, I would welcome any councillor to make a motion and we can open it to debate. Councillor Keller-Hempy.
I can make a motion, Mayor Ireland, to direct administration to write off the property tax receivable for roll 50000 provincial building in the amount of $22,743.92.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hempy. Is there any debate on the motion? Councillor Demota.
No debate, but just a comment, and just reflecting back on what Councillor McGrath had stated last week, in the sense that I think the rent that we get in that building is pretty fair. So there's a little give and take there. And also on a grander scheme, I doubt that this might be this meeting might be viewed at a higher level. But it might be helpful in the future that we have a common understanding. I have to say that I really appreciated the extended help that we got over COVID, in the recognition that we're a tourist destination, and the province saw that we were in a different need as well. So sometimes there are trade-offs. This one's a difficult one to swallow, just because of the way it was delivered. But at the same time, I can accept it for right now, and hopefully through conversations in the future, we might be able to get other things in exchange. So I'd like to keep that one in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devoda. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I'm in favor of the motion because we have no choice, and for no other reason. On a couple of occasions, the question of the rent we pay to the province has been raised, and while I don't disagree that the rent, when compared to downtown rents on commercial properties, is very favorable, to me, that does not speak to this question at all. It's worth pointing out that most of the services that are provided by the municipality space in that provincial building are in fact services that are funded by grants from the provincial and in some cases the federal government. So they aren't really our municipal services, arguably. And while I agree with the motion, and I agree that the rent charged by the province is reasonable, it is the kind of rent that should be charged for not-for-profit public services. It is just the sort of rent that should be expected, where it is those sorts of services that are provided and that kind of use of the space. So it doesn't let the province off the hook. And I would hate for the impression to be created that in some way the reasonable rent that's charged lets the province off the hook for, frankly, not paying the taxes. But I'm in favor of the motion because we have no choice.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. If there's nothing else before calling the question, I just wanted to say that I too will vote in favor of the motion, but as with Councillor Butler, I do so because we really have no alternative. And I inquired last week about whether we might simply retain the amount as a receivable, but I was satisfied with the response from administration that works a great inconvenience to our administration. And I don't want to burden them with the fact that we would never actually get to a point of closing last year's books if we leave this open. My hope, however, is that nothing will change with respect to assessment and taxation, and this will come back to council on an annual basis, where every council is going to have to consciously address reducing a debt owing by the provincial government. And I express my profound disappointment with this practice. As Councillor Janot pointed out, I think on our last session, the province has no hesitation in increasing costs to municipalities. We are now paying for policing, which was not previously a requirement. They've changed the emergency relief legislation, so it's now a 90-10 split, and we don't know what else might come along. And yet on this particular matter, where again, as Councillor Butler has indicated, they accept municipal services to their property and present a negative narrative to the rest of our taxpayers that those services are overpriced. The only reason they do this is because they can. We are a creature of statute. They make the statutes. We must comply. As a lower order of government, we cannot enforce the taxes that everybody else has to pay. I think it is absolutely inappropriate. It has nothing to do with the amount of rent that this community pays. And I hope that if it comes back on an annual basis, we will be able to keep this a live issue and prevail ultimately upon the province to treat municipalities with the degree of respect they deserve. In financial terms, this is but a whisper, but as a sign of disrespect, I think it is deafening, and I am definitely disappointed, but I will vote in favor. If there is nothing else, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Agenda item 8.2,
Mr.
the
Mayor?
2020 Utilities Receivable. Councillor Demota.
Sorry, just to finish up on that last note, I'm sorry to carry on. I just thought maybe this could be, this topic could be something that we could use as an anchor for a meeting with our MLA, amongst a bunch of other things, but I think it might be due time. And we should try to arrange something and just have a discussion on some future collaboration. I know this one stings, and for all the same reasons that you indicated, but I think that there is an opportunity for discussion around this, and it could be a good idea to have as a base to start to initiate a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. It is a topic that I hope will remain live and should come up with our MLA when we have our next discussion, whenever that might be. Thank you for that. I will return to agenda item 8.2. Mr. Given.
Thank you, Worship. Well, in a similar vein of closing off the 2020 books, administration is recommending that council approve the write-off of utilities receivable for the account listed in the recommendation in the amount of $44,092.99. Again, very briefly, recognizing that council saw this last week at Committee of the Whole. Because of a convergence of factors, the change in operators at the water treatment plant last year saw the operational costs significantly increased over previous years. And that was not unknown to administration and council. I think everyone was well aware that that was going to be the case after the facility had been somewhat under-resourced potentially in the past. In any case, that increased operational cost, which nearly doubled over the course of the year, compared to previous years, was accounted for through all regular billings, except for in the case of one utility customer that pays on a percentage of total flow basis. The challenge last year was that with our new operator, we didn't receive total flow numbers until very late in the calendar year, towards October of 2020. And that meant that our billing to this customer that operates on a percentage of flow basis wasn't known until very late in the year, and made it very difficult for them to accept to account for the doubling of increase in their costs. Through a discussion between myself and the customer, administration is recommending that council write off the $44,000, which essentially comes off their 2020 amount owing, in recognition of the extenuating circumstances in terms of the change in operators, the change in operational cost, and the delay in billing to the end customer. I will note that even if with this reduction, the write-off that administration is requesting, this is still a substantial increase in that customer's billing over what they would have seen in 2019. So I think it is a fair solution that administration was able to work out with the customer. And I would note that on a go-forward basis, the customer has some projections of what they will see in 2021 based on our existing operator and our soon-to-be new operator. And so administration has opened up the lines of communication so that there will be no further surprises for the customer or for the municipality going forward. But with that, administration is recommending that in order to close off the 2020 books, council approve this write-off of utilities as recommended in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Any additional questions for Mr. Given or administration? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Mayor, through to Mr. Given. In subsequent years, does administration anticipate a change in the arrangement or contract or deal with this operator in respect of the huge increase to the operating cost of the facility, or do we expect proportionately that the same portion will be paid? So in this past year, we find reasons that the operator should not pay the agreed upon portion. I accept that, but I'm wondering what we foresee. Do we see that arrangement being restructured, or will it carry on as currently in place?
Your Worship, to Councillor Butler's question, at this time, administration sees the arrangement carrying on as it is, with the customer paying that agreed upon, which is set proportion, which is set out in the bylaw. Administration has worked with the customer to give them, again, some forecast information on what they should be budgeting for in 2021, based on the preliminary numbers from our, the current numbers from our existing contractor, and what we're forecasting as preliminary numbers from our incoming contractor at the water treatment plant. Administration is forecasting that the operational cost of the water treatment plant will decrease somewhat from the 2020 year. And the customer is aware of that. But specifically to your question, Councillor Butler, the customer is expecting to pay the same proportion of the total costs. They are just better informed of what those total costs are likely to be in 2021. And I think it is reasonable to say that as Council discusses the utility rate bylaw and the overall system, it may be worth discussing this approach with this one customer. It is a bit of a, at least to my eye, it is a bit of a odd situation where one customer is billed in a different way than every other customer. There may be some extenuating circumstance there. I understand that there had been previous capital contributions that the customer made, and there might have been a recognition of that. My further understanding is that those capital contributions are largely paid for. And so there may be an opportunity for the municipality and the customer to have a discussion on a go-forward basis. But for the 2021 year, it would be status quo in terms of their percentage of total operating costs. We are forecasting that those total operating costs will be less in 2021 than they were in 2020.
Councillor Butler.
May I follow up? Thank you. So my only other question then, again, for Mr. Given, would be one approach to dealing with this problem is, as has been recommended. Another would be a deferral, to defer these amounts and have them paid over potentially some long period of time. And I'm wondering if administration considered and rejected that possibility.
Yeah. Thanks, Your Worship, for Councillor Butler. Yes, administration did consider that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the municipality shares some responsibility in the situation that occurred in 2020. I fully acknowledge that, and that's why I think that is why the recommendation is coming forward from me, that it is appropriate for the municipality to acknowledge the fact that we had a role to play in ensuring that the customer received accurate and timely billing. And because we could have done better, that's why I'm making this recommendation rather than a recommendation that we simply defer.
If I may, I'd just like, just thank you very much. Tough questions, good answers. That helps me a great deal in understanding the rationale behind this. Thank you.
In the absence of any other questions for Mr. Given, is there a councillor prepared to put forward a motion? Councillor Butler?
I would move that, yes. As written in our agenda package.
Thank you. The motion then is council direct administration to write off utilities receivable for account 01123.01 in the amount of $44,092.99. Any further debates on that motion? Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Given, for that. That takes us to agenda item 8.3, paid parking revised scope. Again, over to you, Mr. Given.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, as sort of as our practice now, Council has seen this report a couple of times. The discussion around paid parking has gone through a couple of iterations. We are here with the recommendation that came forward from Committee of the Whole last week, that Council approve the 2021 paid parking project be implemented under the following terms. The The project run from May 3rd to October 12th. I'll note that date has changed in recognition of the discussion at committee last week to extend it just past the Thanksgiving long weekend. That the area be the area currently subject to 2-hour parking for the same posted hours, and that administration implement a permit parking system for residents in areas of adjacent residential housing. As discussed at the committee last week, administration would propose to essentially piggyback on the Parks Canada resident parking pass system rather than creating a new system. This council should be aware that we've continued to meet with our stakeholder committee, and once the scope is confirmed, we would finalize that committee with additional stakeholders. Administration has also continued with the RFP process for a parking solutions provider, basically the technology provider. We will be reviewing the submissions that came in from that RFP, on Thursday of this week. And I think it's important to note a lot of us, I think, when we think of paid parking, think of parking meters lining the streets. With technology today, that is not a requirement. We will likely have a mobile app-based solution, which really does reduce the amount of physical infrastructure that's required. I think it's important to note that administration will make every best effort to start by May 3rd, but we should acknowledge that at this date, it's unlikely that it will be fully implemented May 3rd, but council providing this approval will give administration the go-ahead to order signage, select a service provider, begin public communications, and move forward with the implementation this year that will allow us to collect the data and understanding of how the system works and improvements, importantly. And I think to acknowledge that for the community and for council, it is administration's full intention that through the course of the year, we will identify opportunities to refine and improve the system. And at the conclusion of the program, we'll bring forward recommendations to council for any adjustments that administration identifies or that our stakeholder community identifies. So with that, council, you can see the recommendation in the report, and administration would recommend that council approve this so that we can move forward with the pilot project for the 2021 year.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Questions for Mr. Given or administration? Councillor Demota?
I'm not sure if I have a question, but I just like the fact that Mr. Given noted that there is an opportunity to make adjustments with this program going forward. My main concern after our discussions at previous meetings is people that might have mobility, or maybe not mobility issues, but are less mobile than they used to be, that live on further reaches of the community outside of the downtown core, that might need a little bit more access, and then to pay the $2. I hope that there's some leniency or some type of program we can have for residents going into town and limiting them to a certain amount of time within that 2-hour parking stall or parking area. So that, I don't know, I think that if people feel like they're getting something shoved in a certain direction, that there might be more negative feedback instead of like an overall a potential for a better buy-in, so to speak. So if we're open into looking at other opportunities, then I'm definitely for this. I do have some other questions, but I'll let other councillors have some say. Excuse me, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Granby.
I am in favor of paid parking. A question for Mr. Given. I'm hoping that there'll be some sort of set up for seniors that don't have mobile apps or don't have phones that they can actually get paid for their parking. Is there like something where they can go to the municipality and pay for their parking there? I just hate to see our seniors all being ticketed because they don't have the technology.
Your Worship, to Councillor Keller MP's question, that is something we're going to be reviewing in the RFP submissions. I believe that we did ask the providers to identify how their solution would work, not just for mobile apps, but also for people who may not be using a mobile app. And so we'll be able to report back to you after we've had a chance to review the RFP submissions, but that is something that administration is aware of. There are still people who may wish to use physical currency, and we will have to consider how that might happen. But I think the intention here is to recognize the major focus, and the most of the people who will interact with the system will do it digitally, but we're well aware that there is a need to account for others as well, and I'll be able to report back to Council after we review the RFP submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
Thank you. Any other questions of administration through Mr. Gibbon? Councillor Wilson.
Not a question. I'd just like to thank administration for reworking this into what I believe represents what I think the majority of council would like to see roll out this year. I think with anything, we're going to have growing pains, and I think we move forward with what the approach that we have now, and we rework it in coming years. And unfortunately, to speak to Councillor Demota's suggestion of being flexible with certain members of the community, it's going to be pretty difficult to highlight who those people are and who gets preferential treatment. Unfortunately, downtown cores have paid parking. We have to be resolute in moving forward with it and deal with some of the setbacks in coming years. And I think this is a great first kick at it, and I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. In the absence of further questions, although Councillor Demota, if you have a question for administration, go ahead. Okay, at this stage, I would just like to have a motion before us. If any councillor is prepared to make that motion, and then that will be open to debate, and we will leave administration still able to answer questions if they arise, but get on with the debate on the matter. Is there a motion? Councillor Wilson, thank you.
I'd be willing to make the motion. Thank you.
All right, the motion is that council approve the 2021 paid parking project be implemented under the following terms: that the program run from May 3rd, 2021 to October 12th, 2021 in the area currently subject to 2-hour parking and for the same posted hours, and with a parking permit system for residents in areas of adjacent residential housing, recognizing that May 3rd is a target date. Any debate on that question? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. A few points I want to make with respect to this motion, and I am speaking in favor of the motion. It's worth the public understanding that this question has come up many times over the years. It has been subjected to months and even years of consideration by this and previous councils. This question has been aired out and exposed and discussed to a huge extent, more than many questions have been in the past. It's important to understand that every decision we make has positive implications for some people and negative implications for the others. This is unavoidable in virtually every decision we make. And I have to congratulate council, and I think we should congratulate ourselves in having really opened up and discussed the questions of negative implications. We all understand that paid parking is frankly not something that anyone wants, and no one wants to pay for parking, and it will present some difficulties for some people. But I think it's also important to realize that our job here is to assess these questions from, the 30,000-foot view and what is best for the community overall. And we're strapped for cash, and this is an honest and good way to address that. And it is respectful of the community at large. Those who don't drive are, the people in this town who don't drive, either by choice or they don't drive downtown or they cycle or they walk, is an important constituency for us to recognize that they pay their piece for parking downtown, whether they use it or not. And this will help to rectify that and make things a little more egalitarian. There's been, I would say, a fair amount of public engagement on this question. We have and will continue to see opinions coming in for and against, but I'm really pleased to see that that engagement has been really respectful and cognizant of that reality, that no decision will make everyone happy all the time. So I thank those who have expressed their opinions for doing so in that respectful manner. Still, after all that conversation, this is still only a pilot project, which is the reason I'm in favor of it. We will have problems. There will be things that don't work really well, and we will address it. And as we go, administration will be on top of it. I have every confidence, and we will adjust as we go. And we will do a major reassessment in the fall at the end of the first year of the pilot project. Finally, I want to echo Councillor Wilson, and I want to thank administration. A lot of work went into this, a great deal of work and some great work. We tossed around a lot of options as to what a pilot project should look like. So my thanks go out to administration for all that great work, and I am in favor of moving forward with the pilot project.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor DeMota.
I agree with a lot that's said, and I appreciate you, Mr. Mayor, for driving the conversation here. With what I said previously, there are residents that live in the downtown core and have businesses in the downtown core that don't necessarily have back alley access. So to come down with a hammer and make a black and white rule for everybody is sometimes difficult. So when Mr. Givens said that they were going to be exploring anything that might come up and work with that, that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, and seeing that there is some flexibility within what's coming forward. And I do congratulate everybody for getting to where we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I too will speak briefly in favor of the motion. I won't repeat all of the valid comments, but I would say to all that proceeding with a paid parking pilot project does not discount any of the other options which we might consider to enhance the transportation experience and the parking experience in Jasper. And I think, in fact, it should encourage us to pursue other options, such as shuttle buses either around town or to the town or from the town to major campgrounds near the town. Those are valid options for us to consider. And just because we are going to implement, I think, a paid parking pilot project does not mean that those other options ought not to be considered. And I in fact think that this leads us to that subsequent discussion, and I'm excited to move forward with that. So I am certainly prepared to vote in favor of commencing with this paid parking pilot project, but not at all walk away from further options that might be implemented to assist with transportation and parking in our downtown core. Any other comments, debate from councillors? Councillor Journeau?
Similar to what's been said before, and it's kind of a follow-up. I just read the definition of a pilot project is an initial small-scale implementation that is used to prove the viability of a project idea. This could involve either an exploration of a novel new approach, which we're looking at, or the idea of the application of a standard approach recommended by outside parties. So we're doing exactly what we talked about, doing exactly what the mission is on there, and I support it. Thank you.
Councillor DeMota?
One last thing, I think that communication is going to be an important thing, and prior to implementation, so that everybody gets an understanding of what's going on, and again, buy-in from the community. I think it's important. The reason I bring this up is that even though it's not written anywhere or indicated publicly, we have seen that in the downtown core that rules do get relaxed over the slower months when there isn't a high demand on parking. And we've also seen that when May long weekend approaches, that all of a sudden those rules become hard rules. And even though there might not be a high demand on parking, we've seen tickets initiated when there's lots of parking still available in town. So I think that if we're going forward with something like this, there could be some messaging coming out saying that, just as a reminder, there's 2-hour parking in town. Our busy season's coming up, and we want to let you know that there are going to be these restrictions. So I think messaging is important, and I think that it would be for the benefit of the community to have as much news go out in various areas and not just social media or whatever that might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Debota. If there is nothing else, I will call the question. I take it does not require repeating. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you all, and I add my thanks to those of other councillors, to administration, for the detail in the plan and the revisions that you've made at the request of council. But thank you all for significant work in that regard. That takes us to agenda item 8.4, the operating budget for 2021. Not sure, Mr. Given, whether you need to remind us, but I will allow you to remind us of where we are, and that will at least commence the discussion with questions and hopefully a motion that gets us through to a budget of some sort at the end of this day. Mr. Given?
Sure, thanks, Your Worship. Again, brief introduction. Council has discussed the 2021 budget extensively starting in November of 2020 with public presentations continuing through December of 2020 and then into March of 2021, where Committee of the Whole reviewed the revised budget and approved a number of amendments to the budget, including a $100,000 reduction in the operational budget in the Ops Department. Council also approved increased funding to some external groups, including the Jasper Artists Guild, Evergreens Foundation, and Victim Services. And Council Committee of the Whole also is recommending forward a $1 million 2021 municipal property tax credit that would be applied proportionally to all property taxpayers. And Council has directed the establishment of a 2021 COVID relief reserve in the amount of $775,000, which will provide additional flexibility for Council to make some decisions about how they may wish to address COVID relief either in the 2021 year or into future years. And so there is still a range of options that are available to this Council. I think Council should be proud of the work that they've done as Council Committee of the Whole. With the application of the $1 million tax credit, it would mean that the cost of taxes per $100,000 of assessment in 2021 would be the lowest amount in the past 20 years, other than the 2020 emergency year that Council is obviously well aware of. But outside of that 2020 year, the $227 per $100,000 of residential assessed value is the lowest in the past 20 years. And that is the budget that is in front of Council here. This was set aside at our last regular Council meeting and is here for Council's consideration today. And with that, Mayor Ireland, I'll turn it over to you and to Council for decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Any questions of Mr. Given or administration generally with respect to the current status of the budget? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question for council and administration. The recommendation is that the council approve the 2021 operating budget as amended. That's a little not lack of definition as far as I'm concerned. First of all, our auditors will require, and it's best practice, that we have the amounts in there. So it would be total revenue and total expenses. An added feature would be the total projected amount of taxation to our residents. So that's my question. What is the total revenue, total expenses that we can put in a motion? Thank you.
Your worship, I'll speak briefly to Councillor Jeannot's question. I appreciate, Councillor Jeannot, your question. It is entirely customary and appropriate for council to approve a motion such as this as amended, recognizing that council may choose to approve additional amendments which would change the numbers that you're speaking about. And so that's why the motion is phrased as it is here. Upon conclusion of council's discussions about the operational budget, administration would prepare the final budget details. But I can say that the total tax support proposed in 2021 is approximately $888,000, sorry, $8,880,000 as presented in the attached document.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. Welcome, Councillor McGrath. Happy to see that you were able to join us. Just speaking to Councillor Jeannot's question, and I accept entirely what he says, that we should be approving a particular budget. But as I understand, we have got ourselves to a position where at Committee of the Whole, there was a recommendation to forward to council a budget of a particular amount. I think that was reflected in a motion that was defeated by tie vote last week, but still subject to further amendment. So while I certainly understand Councillor Jeannot's position on the detail of the motion, subject to whatever other amendments might be made before we get to the vote today, is it clear that we are speaking of specific amounts for revenue, expense, and the ultimate municipal tax levy? Mr. Gibbon, you can confirm that is the case, and that's what's reflected in the material in the budget today.
Yes. And again, for additional clarity for council and the community, the attached package is the information as proposed in the March meetings. There were a number of amendments that were approved by council, and when council concludes the budget discussions and any potential amendments, administration would prepare finalized documents for publication to the community. But the outcome of the discussions on March 23rd were really some minor additions by council in terms of external community group funding, that $100,000 reduction, and so the net amount is very similar. But again, administration expects that there may be additional discussion, and so we would publish and post the finalized version once council's concluded its decision making.
Thank you for that, Councillor Demota.
Thank you. And just to back Councillor Jeannot's comments a little bit, it does say as amended, and as much as there might have been, just a change in $100,000, I think what the community and other councillors are used to seeing is a presentation on the net tax envelope, and that does provide some clarity to the community on what we're specifically talking about today. So if numbers have been amended, then it would be, I think, prudent to show the community what we're debating. We can go through departments and talk about, you know, what may work better here and there, but overall, as a photograph, I don't want to get into a debate with administration. I just think going forward, as far as clarity and transparency goes, that we practice, you know, if something is amended, that, you know, the people in the community and other councillors, other than myself, know what the photograph, the big picture looks like. And although there was an amendment in one area of $100,000, what we're actually discussing today with the March presentation is entirely different than what we have from what we've had in November. So there have been a lot of changes, and I think that it is a little unclear on for some people on what some of the debate and discussions could be. And I thought for clarity down the road, it'd be better to have that net tax envelope included in future budget presentations. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Butler.
First off, I'd like to apologize for not being here 2 weeks ago. We had a bit of a family emergency, although, and so I think it resulted in a tie vote on the budget as presented 2 weeks ago. Is that correct? And has it been amended since the vote 2 weeks ago?
Your worship, to Councillor Wilson's question, no, it has not been amended. The reference to amendments is the amendments that were made at the March 23rd and 24th Council Committee of the Whole meetings.
Okay, thank you. It may be a bit premature, but I would also suggest that the tie vote was my fault, and I'd like to take responsibility for that. I would make the motion to put the budget as proposed on whatever date the 2 weeks ago meeting was, with a reduction, a further reduction of $20.21 from my councillor remuneration account in penalty for missing too many meetings and causing more and more discussion. I think we've kind of gone over this for many months now. Honestly, I would put that motion forward to get it back on the table and have a result one way or the other. It's a bit of a unclear motion, but if we'd like to move forward with that, I won't put it there just yet, because I think Councillor Butler had his hand up before me. So, but anyway, that's there for the making if we'd like to.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I guess what I say next depends on whether we have a motion on the table or not.
We do
so-
not have a motion. I think Councillor Wilson was clear that he was going to withhold his suggested motion in deference to you, and your hand might have been up earlier, but because of your background, sometimes it's difficult to see. So I think Councillor Wilson has recognized that you wish to speak, so he has withheld his motion for the time.
All right, thanks very much. And I didn't realize that. I'll change my background. So Mr. Given is correct. We've discussed, had budget discussions since last November, and we had 2 public budget presentations in November. The difficulty we faced is the budget we're looking at now is substantially different. It is very different from the budget that was discussed and proposed back in November. And for that reason, I found myself 2 weeks ago completely unable to support this budget, notwithstanding the conversations we had at Committee of the Whole. And we chose a process, which I think was a valid one, as I stated back then. You got to start somewhere. You're either going to work from the bottom up or the top down, going through a budget. And forgive me, I have quite a bit to say here. But there we have it. We went through department by department and found a lack of willingness and consensus among council to make reductions to the budget that was proposed to us in March. And we have now an operating budget, which in the view of some of us 2 weeks ago was simply too high. And so we have to deal with this. Administration has made a really good case that Jasper's real tax rate has been declining over the years. I know that's true. I felt it myself, and I was really happy to see that illustrated so clearly, and the community needs to understand that. But there is a difference between where our tax rate should sit and what we should do with the money. And I have concerns about what amounts to nearly $1 million year-over-year increase to the net operating deficit for the organization. And I'm simply not comfortable moving forward with an operating budget of that size. While I am comfortable, and I am convinced by the argument as to the size of the tax envelope. So strong arguments have been presented to us over and over again that our infrastructure and our facilities are deteriorating, and we need money to keep them up to date. And I know that, and I accept that. The proposed use of the most funding to shield the community from needed increases is a good argument, and I accept that argument. So we do need to get our tax rate up to something that is more sustainable over the long term for a community like ours, and using the funding that we have to spread out the impact of that increase over time is a good argument. But the presented budget increases the net operating deficit, as I said, by a little under $1 million year over year compared to 2019. That is a lot of increase in 1 year, somewhere around 12%. I accept the argument that taxes are going to have to increase over the long term, but I can't accept the level of operational growth, what we spend to run the organization, that level of increase in 1 year. We already passed a record-setting capital budget of $18 million. I don't think we've ever passed a budget or this. I don't think the community has ever seen a capital budget of that size. I recognize the need for that, and I went along with that happily, because we need to address the infrastructure deficit that we face. But this year's capital budget alone, there's almost $10 million of new borrowing. $10 million of new borrowing that we're undertaking in 1 year to address that capital budget. Debt servicing implications of a debt that size every year are going to be somewhere around $200,000 just to service the debt, not even pay it down. And that's coming out of our operating budget. It has to, there's nowhere else for it to come from. So we can't do anything about that because we need to do the work represented by that capital budget. So to support the needed maintenance and upgrades to infrastructure in years to come, we need to increase reserves and not spend all of that tax increase in 1 year. That's just not responsible. To support the COVID recovery in our hard-hit community, we need to increase reserves. The impact of the large tax increase can be spread out over a few years to come using those reserves. And that was a recommendation of administration, and I'm proud of it, and I think it's a good one. I have a question with the size of the reserves. I think they should be larger. While the ability of the taxpayers to pay is compromised, we can cushion the blow with those reserves. In essence, our reserves are and can be thought of as a tax stabilization fund. We have to have funds available to assist the community in recovering from COVID in the next few years. And for those, we need reserves. And we need to be prepared to help individuals, businesses, and individuals who are really suffering unduly under COVID. And we've set ourselves on a course to do that, and I'm happy about it. But back in November, we were considering a budget with about $430,000 of increased operating deficit, $430,000 over 2019. Now, just a few weeks ago, we were asked to consider a budget with about $970,000 of increase in operating budget year over year, and it's too much. And regrettably, I feel like with the process we went over, some of the arguments for huge departmental increases have really not been fully fleshed out. And in fact, those arguments have been overshadowed by the conversation about the most funding. And the most funding is really helpful and it's really good and we should use it effectively. But let's look at some of the specifics of the increases to net operating deficit. There's $90,000 in 1 year of new net operating deficit in emergency services. And that increase in operating deficit was not there for us to look at in November. That's a new increase since November. And I'm sorry, but I asked questions about it and I'm frankly unconvinced, or I don't even understand really why is that money needed and why is it on the budget now when it wasn't there in November? I'm just not convinced by the argument. And if I'm not convinced by the argument, I can't support it. In culture and recreation, we have $66,000 of new net operating deficit since November. That's already on top of a whopping 10% increase in net operating deficit over 2019. And that's after using most to help. So already in November, we were looking at a 10% increase in net operating deficit in that department. And now it's $66,000 more. In CFS, administration is asking for an additional $24,000 in support of daycare. Again, we have most, we used most, and still we're being asked to apply an additional $24,000 in support for daycare. That's a big number. That's with already, honestly, some hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in support for that facility when you add up all of the ways in which it's supported. And still, and here's my problem with it, still, inexplicably, daycare fees are unaffordable for many lower income families in this town. We still have pretty high daycare fees, even with all that support. So I think that increased support that's being asked for, it may be valid, but it should be used differently and it should be used and sequestered to support low income families rather than simply being dumped into the general operation. So what I'm trying to do here is rather than just complain about, oh, well, the budget's too high, I'm trying to point out that there are ways in which we can reduce the budget responsibly in a way that, while I would never pretend that these changes would not be felt by the community, they're manageable and something that would be appropriate in this time of restraint. Also in CFS, there's $25,000 for emergency social services. And I know this has been something that I've harped on quite a lot, but to be fair, what we're trying to do here is dig ourselves out of a pretty deep hole due to the current crisis. And meanwhile, we're being asked for $25,000 for planning for the next crisis. And I just think that sometimes we have to focus on where we're at and recognize that when the next crisis rolls along, we will manage it. Now, I think that there's a trend across the world right now to plan for disaster and keep planning, but there needs to be a point at which we say the planning that we've done is good. We feel ready, we feel prepared. And I'm not in favor of sort of the never-ending, fruitless planning process for the next unforeseeable event. And some are going to see this as a lack of confidence and respect for the staff that do that work, but in fact, it's entirely the opposite. We get excellent service from excellent people operating in those departments, and we've seen it through the last year. We've seen great support for the community, for the organization in COVID, and we don't need to keep putting money toward planning for the future. The last thing, second last thing I want to talk about is the $66,000 increase in the communications budget. This was a request to council last fall to look at adding a position, and we agreed with it. But at that time, the request for decision said that council should take a look at whether we want to fund it with new money or fund it internally. And I think we should make that decision. I think we should fund that position internally. I think we have the resources to do it. I think there are ways that that can be done, and it doesn't have to be new money. In operations, we're being asked for $35,000 in new year over year net operating deficit in municipal housing. We hardly have any municipal housing. We have very little municipal housing. And you know what bothers me is that we have no policy that I can find anywhere relating to how we manage municipal housing. I can't know how we charge, how we recuperate costs, what staff are eligible, and where I have real concerns with equity among staff. Some staff seem to have the advantage of living in employer-provided housing at what may or may not, I don't know because I can't see it, be substantially under market rents, and others do not. And I think that until and unless we have solid policy in that area, that we should not be increasing that operating line as much as we are. So I've talked a lot, but it's because it's the most important decision we're going to make between now and the end of the year. The problem, I'm also going to mention that there was also $100,000 in operations for new positions. And to be fair and understand, we've already reduced that. So I just want to acknowledge that. The problem with increasing the annual operating budget so much in 1 year is that it's never a 1 year cost. If we add $1 million into the operating budget of this organization this year, it will be there again next year, and it will be there again the year following. And it's a lot of money over a long period of time. And we need to understand that. It's one thing to spend a lot of money on capital infrastructure, but it's quite another to see such an increase year over year. I'm going to put a motion on the table. And I understand that these measures, if passed, will not be met with approbation by administration. I do get that. It's been suggested that my approach represents a lack of confidence or respect in staff, but it's not. I do have confidence and I do respect staff, and I do understand that the recommendations brought forward are the recommendations that administration thinks are in the best interest of the organization and the municipality and the residents. But it's our job to weigh that against a large number of factors relating to what's best for the community at large. So I've crafted a motion here in a very specific way because I don't think that there's support in the room for these reductions. This budget failed in a tied vote 2 weeks ago. I suspect that there may be, particularly given what Councillor Wilson said, that there isn't support in the room to reduce this budget. So my motion is going to be this. The council consider removing up to $250,000 in net operating deficit from the currently proposed 2021 operating budget by considering certain departmental reductions and reallocations. Now, I know I've talked a lot, but I wanted to be clear on where I personally, this is just my view, think that there are opportunities for reductions. The reductions that I quickly ran through there represent over $300,000 in potential reductions. And I would like to council to give consideration, again, to removing up to $250,000 in the net operating deficit from the currently proposed budget. So I'm being really clear in this motion. I'm suggesting that we consider this. For those in the room who voted in favor of the budget 2 weeks ago and that weren't in the room and may be in favor of that budget, well then just vote against this motion and we'll be done. If there is support to go through an exercise to reduce the budget by considering some of those specific points or others that other councillors maybe have, then vote in favor of this motion, my suggestion is, and we will go through that process. But I have no interest in going through a process of reduction by reduction, looking at motion after motion, seeing them all defeated, because most of the people in this room are happy with the budget as presented. I'm not here, even though I'm talking a lot, I'm not here to be heard about these motions and these reductions. So one last time, the council consider removing up to $250,000 in net operating deficit from the currently proposed 2021 operating budget by considering certain departmental reductions and reallocations. I'm happy if any of what I have said is not clear to take questions, and I'm happy to hear the mayor's view on whether this motion is appropriate and an effective way to deal with the question before us today. Thank you very much for listening to me go on.
I have a Zoom chair and we lost Mayor Ireland in the last 5 minutes. Councillor Butler, you will have to repeat your motion. I'm going to call a 5-minute recess, and hopefully within that time, Mayor Ireland will be able to get his internet issues sorted, and we will return at 10:50.
Thank you. I had not even noticed that Mayor Ireland had left the room.
Councillor Kelleher-Enfi for taking over and calling a recess while I reconfigured things. Councillor Butler, all I can really recall was that you were somewhere midstream. And was there a motion coming out of that?
Yes, Mayor Ireland, there was. I think I didn't see when you left or were forced out, but I'll just repeat my motion. My motion is that council consider removing up to $250,000 in net operating deficit from the currently proposed 2021 operating budget by considering certain departmental reductions and reallocations. And I will just repeat what I had stated in case you didn't hear, Mr. Mayor, that the spirit of my motion is that if there is adequate consensus in the room to go ahead and pass the budget as presented with the changes that we already went through, the amendments that we already went through in committee of the whole, then the proper thing to do is defeat this motion. And then we will carry on and we will have to deal with how to get the budget as presented back on the table, but I think that can be accomplished. I do have prepared a motion with the specifics in it that I have proposed that we could follow to reduce the budget, but I don't have the stomach to go through all of those specifics if they're simply going to be defeated. So if this motion were to pass, well, then I would be prepared to proceed with some motions to give some specificity to those reductions and to allow other councillors the same opportunity. But my expectation is this motion probably gets defeated and then we would move on. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. Councillor Demota, I see you, but if I may just have a moment to get clarity for myself. The motion then, Councillor Butler, that you have presented at this time, could you just benefit just so I fully understand what motion is before council?
Sorry, Richard, you cut out there a little. Did you ask me to read the motion again?
Yes, please. Just for my benefit, so I can understand what is before council.
My motion is that council consider removing up to $250,000 in net operating deficit from the currently proposed 2021 operating budget by considering certain departmental reductions and reallocations.
All right. Thank you. That makes perfect sense now, and I appreciate the motion. It is a motion to consider up to a set number of other reductions. But the spirit of the motion, as you indicated, is debate about specifics, which we would get to only if we indicate that we have a willingness to go there. We can save that debate until later. So I greatly appreciate that, plus your other comments that if there is a will to return to the question that was defeated at our last meeting, we can find a way to do that. So I certainly acknowledge that position and thank you for it, and appreciate the sensitivity that you've shown to the issue before us. Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Okay, first of all, I just want to check, Mr. Mayor, if you can hear us okay, because you are breaking up. We got all your audio, but your video was breaking up intermittently, but it seemed like your audio chain was unbroken. So we got all that you said. Hopefully you can hear everything I've said.
I can, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, in the spirit of this motion, I just want to say that one of my more proud moments that I had on this council was our collaborative effort to get through our debate on the capital budget and the resolution that came out of that. And in the spirit of that as well, I would propose or be in favor of going through what Councillor Butler had stated in whatever fashion that he had or wanted to address these particular items, or just by department and go through it and go through this in a similar fashion that we did with our capital budget deliberations. And I think that we can come out with a good outcome on this, because I do agree that the changes since November are a little bit much for the community to take at this time. And I'm willing to have a broader discussion on the items that he's proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Other debates on the motion? Councillor Janot.
I very much appreciate the effort and work that Councillor Butler has put in, and I will support this motion. The reference to the defeated motion, that was only an amount stated in the taxation. We did not have a total of expenses and a total of receipts, which I had been requested, which is standard practice. And so it was a motion that came about just to try and put an amount in there. So it was defeated, which is minor. The problem with not having a specific amount there or an interim motion or whatever is exactly what's happening now. We were presented with a budget in November, and now there's a huge amount of increases in spend, and then we're being asked to approve as amended. Let's get to a benchmark and talk about exactly what we're going to approve. Our auditors require that we put the total amount in as the expenses and revenue. This, I know, is a sideline to what the motion is about, so I just leave it there and say that I'm supporting Councillor Butler's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau, Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Kelleher-Rempe.
Councillor Journeau, I'd just like to clarify, I think you were in favor of the motion as presented 2 weeks ago. Councillor Butler's motion is to open it back up and further discuss items that can that may be reduced. I think we've been at this for the better part of a half a year. We've had the opportunity. Unfortunately, we can't open this back up at this point in time and have enough time to really make these modifications. I just don't see how this is possible within the time constraints. I think we had the opportunity over the last 6 months to do what exactly Councillor Butler is proposing. So by voting in favor of Councillor Butler's motion, it means a lot of work. It's not just today. It means opening back up what we've opened back up countless times. I fear this is going awry.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Kelleher-Rempe, and then Councillor Demota.
I'm in support. I think we're just going to, for me, I know for me, it's on our own council budget, I think is way too high. I would like to see some of that money used for the communications specialist position and other money. I'm okay with the tax requisition, but I do support Councillor Butler that we do need to look at some of these budgets. It's only fair to our citizens.
Councillor Demota, and then Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, what was discussed and voted on was committee of the whole, and we're here at a regular meeting now. So, and what Councillor Butler is proposing to do is something entirely different. And I'm willing to put in the work. And unfortunately, up until this point, and through going through the budget several times over and over again, if it was easy, it would have been done already. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty and a cloud around what exactly we're discussing and what was voted on. And I think that what Councillor Butler is presenting has taken a lot of time for a lot of people to come to the discussion that we're at today. And yes, we've rehashed and hashed things over, but so much has changed since November, and there wasn't a lot of clarity. And we also had an almost 3-month gap in having discussions on the budget. So we talked about some stuff in December, and then we didn't really address this till a few months later, until it was presented as amended again. So through the amendment, there was a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity in some of the changes as far as I'm concerned. So I appreciate the argument that you know, we discussed this in the past, but I don't think in its current iteration that it has been walked through in the same fashion that we did with the capital budget. So I'm willing to go through this. And, you know, if we do this in the same fashion, I don't know how to present a friendly amendment if there's one needed, but I would like to walk through this. And if councillors through each department have something that they want to say from some of the research they've done and taken the time to go through the budget, I'm willing to hear it. So Councillor Keller-Hampy, for an example, said that there might be an opportunity to use some council money to go towards a position. So I'm willing to go through. So how do we go about that? Does someone have a suggestion where let's just start by at the top with the finance and administration budget and then walk through in the order that it's in, presented in the package? Is that a way to do it?
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and I apologize to council. I did not come as prepared as I would like to. I'm on my iPhone and I do not have my notes from previous meetings as I was attending to other matters all night last night. So forgive me if I am not my best prepared today. I thank Councillor Butler for the motion that he has put forward and for the intention and the work that he has put into this motion. However, I do not support the motion as it's presented. We put lots of work in last budget season to take away a nominal amount from the budget, the operating budget. And my learning experience from that was not supported by the residents of Jasper. I had to answer to a lot of angry residents who had services removed from their community that they did not want removed. They wished to pay their taxes and they wished for their services to remain untouched. I don't see a desire from our residents to see a reduction in service levels in our community. We do need to plan for our future, Jasper's future. We do need to invest money into recovery and resiliency and community safety. These areas will cost money, and therefore I support moving forward with the amended motion that was presented by administration, or something that is not as rigid as taking $250,000 out of the budget that I have no idea how it will impact the people living in Jasper.
Councillor Trudeau.
Thank you. We're already speaking about removing $250,000 out of the budget. We're not. Councillor Butler's motion is simply to reduce the increase by 250,000. It's still an increase of 750,000, which is a huge increase. So the original proposal is for $1 million. We're taking out. Councillor Butler's motion is to reduce it by 250, and I agree with that. It's still a large increase. It provides administration with lots of money. We're just asking them to maybe reallocate some of the ideas that they had, but we're not reducing the budget by 250,000. We're still going to increase the budget by $750,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Juneau. Councillor Demota.
I understand what Councillor McGrath is saying, and some very valid points. And what I'm talking about here is some more clarification. Even council, as we are debating this, does not seem clear on what we're discussing. And this is one of the major problems with not having the proper details in front of us. And I'm not knocking administration, it's just a product of the process. So we're not talking about reducing taxes here. We're talking about looking at the overall budget. And I think there's still some uncertainty in some of the debate here. So Councillor Journeau is right. And I understand what we went through last year, and this is something completely different. This is actually where I wanted to start last year and come out to a resolution. I don't think that, you know, we should reduce the tax requisition that we talked about. I think it's more about reducing the massive increase in expenses, particularly the difference between November and March. And I don't know what happened in those 3 months that changed our budget so drastically, but that needs to be addressed. Because if we would have voted on this and passed it in November, we wouldn't have had this increase. We wouldn't be having this debate today. It would have been settled and done. So now we're talking about a huge increase that I'm not sure exactly how it surmounted to the amount it's there. And I think it's our responsibility to the community to go through this and discuss the options that are available and that are presented by Councillor Butler. Thank you.
Thank you. Before turning to Councillor Butler to close debate, I will repeat that I am very appreciative of the form of the motion by Councillor Butler. I understand the spirit and intent and the way he has configured his motion so that it is a motion to consider further reductions rather than to vote specifically on reductions at this time. All that said, however, I find myself drawn to oppose the motion. There has been much discussion that somehow this is changed or amended budget from December that comes as a surprise or a shock. In fact, we had detailed discussion through March about this budget. The amended budget that is presented is a budget amended by council. And following our committee of the whole meetings, which were an extensive review of the current state of affairs, we made specific motions with respect to every department, and that resulted in what is generally called the amended budget, but it's not as if administration presented us with some amendments that we knew nothing of. We orchestrated ourselves to this position, looking at every department and making motions, and then as a committee, move this forward for consideration by council. And I fully accept that having done that, no councillor is then committed to vote in favor of the recommendation, but we have still had ample opportunity to review. If we take this opportunity as perfectly nuanced as it is, I think it opens us to continual and unending debate. We will always have this issue that something has changed in the last 2 weeks or may change tomorrow. A budget is in part a financial document, an economic document. It's also a political statement. I would like to move forward with a show of confidence that we can at least manage our own affairs. Last year, immediately it seemed after we passed the budget, we were drawn into expenditures which had not been part of the budget, and we managed to get through it, in part because of the most money, which we didn't know about a year ago, but might have been somewhat anticipated. I think the same is likely to happen. A budget is a guide. We've seen nothing but curling on TV lately. It's a broom. You might hit the broom and miss your shot. You might miss the broom and still make your shot. This is a guideline. We can change as we go. We had to do that last year. But I think the community is deserving of a council that is prepared to make decisions and move forward. And I fear that this entrenches us in ongoing debate that could lead to line by line reconsideration of the budget in total. And I simply cannot see myself wishing that we go there. And it's not a question of not being prepared to do the work. I am entirely prepared to do the work, and we will get into the work if that is the will of council. But I think there are other factors at play as well, and therefore I am opposed to the motion. Councillor Butler, I open it to you to close debate.
Thank you very much. I would like to emphasize how cheerfully I accept a defeat of this motion if that is the way it is going to go. I will, however, make a few comments on some of the comments that have been raised. Councillor Wilson said we have been at this for months. The specifics in this budget that cause me concern are primarily those which we saw for the first time about a month ago. This budget is approximately represents approximately a $500,000 increase over the version that we were looking at in November in net operating deficit. It's a lot of money and it deserves consideration. I am confused by Mayor Ireland's comments that we looked at all of these questions in March. I just don't think we did. I don't think that we were ever considering in March a budget with a $8.8 million or something tax requisition. So I must be missing a cue, because it is not my intention to go over old ground. I simply think that while we went through the compressed, I will say, budget conversations in March and went department by department, I'm not sure that we ever recognized as we went through those that we were setting ourselves up for a budget with about a 12% year-over-year increase of nearly $1 million in what we spend operating the organization in a year. And I can't live with that. I have a different experience from that which Councillor McGrath mentioned, where she suggests that there are many people in town who don't want to see their services reduced. I certainly experienced that. But personally, I am experiencing a great deal of pushback about the size of the budgetary increase in our operating budget this year. And with respect to the question of investing in the future, that really is my point. If we were to reduce our operating budget in various areas with total reductions that I can see of about $250,000, and I'm not particularly married to that number, my proposal would be that all of the differences get put away into reserves. And that still gives us lots of opportunity to look at changes as changes are needed, because reserves are there. You can't spend money twice. If we put it into the operating budget this year, that money will not be in reserves for us to consider. If there are in this operating budget's specifics which relate to 1 year only because of COVID, well, then we should look at that. But right now, to me, it looks like we are increasing the size of the operating budget year over year by that nearly $1 million. And I expect that we will see, coming back a year from last fall, an operating budget asking for that and more, because that is the way the incremental budgeting process works. So I do appreciate that this motion probably is defeated, and I appreciate the opportunity to voice my concerns about what I think we're about to do, which is increase the operating budget by, well, I have a number of about $970,000 year over year, well over $500,000 of which was not under discussion when we left off our budget conversations last December. So I have nothing more to add, and thank you very much for everyone's consideration to this.
Point of order, Councillor DeMota.
Yes, just for clarification on the motion. So if it gets passed, then we will discuss or have the opportunity to discuss, because this is just a motion not to accept or unaccept the budget, but it's about reviewing the recommendations that Councillor Butler has suggested.
It is a motion which, if passed, will lead us to consider further reductions of up to $250,000. That was my understanding of the motion. I'll let Councillor Butler correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This is not this is not my meeting. If this motion should pass, then councillors will have to consider where we go from here. However, I have a motion prepared which with specific departmental reductions proposals that will result in, it happens to be $249,000 in reduction to the net operating budget if all of those measures were accepted. It ends with a direction that savings would be directed into reserves, And it also ends with a direction that administration would have the opportunity to come back and ask for redirections and reallocations among those things. I'm trying to cut the line between simply saying to administration, take $250,000 out of the operating budget. We could do that, but I know administration would come back and say, well, where does council want us to take it? Because we've had those conversations in the past where administration really doesn't feel that it's in their wheelhouse to make the priority-driven decisions about where to reduce. So I'm trying to be productive here and not just say, well, lower the budget by $250,000. And I'm trying to constructively come up with a budget that can receive a majority, if not actual full consensus of council to pass. So that's my intent. If this motion should succeed, I am prepared to proffer a second motion to direct how the savings could be achieved. And my view is we can navigate in that in this meeting and end this meeting with a budget passed. And that is absolutely my intent. I do not want to draw this conversation out any further than it has been drawn. But again, the numbers we're looking at, many of them have only been on the table for a month. So I hope that clarifies my intent here. Thank you.
All right. I trust Councillor Demoted that is sufficient answer to your point of order. It is a motion to consider reductions, not a motion to make reductions at this point. So I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried with 3 opposed. So having confirmed that we will enter into further consideration, I open the floor to a further motion. And I understand, Councillor Butler, that you have such a motion prepared.
I have, your worship. If it is the will of council, if no others wish to proffer a motion, I will read the motion I have prepared for consideration.
I see no other hands. Go ahead.
So I'm going to read this as one motion. If it's the will of council, of course, we can split the question, allowing us to consider each and every one of these things individually. But I think it would be helpful if people are aware. While I have mentioned each and every one of these things in my discussion, it would be helpful if we were aware all at once of where I am offering suggestions. First, to reduce the allocation to emergency measures and emergency management by $70,000. Second, to reduce the net operating deficit in culture and recreation by $60,000 through reductions in operating expenses or increases in user fees. 3, to reallocate $24,000 of daycare allocation to the COVID recovery reserve to be used to reduce daycare fees for low-income families. 4th, to remove $25,000 allocation for emergency social services. 5, to fund the increase in communications internally with an allocation of $40,000 from the council budget. I would like to point out that that is an idea that I'm hoping that Councillor Keller, her MP, will speak to. 6th, to reduce the allocation for municipal housing by $30,000. And finally, without reducing the tax requisition, to allocate the difference from the above measures to reserves. That is the extent of my motion. Thank you. The additive amount of those numbers that I mentioned is $249,000.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I was trying to take notes. I wonder if I could just get confirmation. $70,000 from emergency services, $60,000 culture and recreation.
Correct.
$24,000 daycare, but to be allocated to the COVID relief or just a relief fund.
Specifically to be used to reduce daycare fees for qualifying for low-income families. I want to be very clear about that.
Yeah.
We would still allocate the money to daycare, but it would be allocated for low-income families.
And then a reallocation of $40,000 from the council budget for the communications position, but that would net out 40,000 out of, I presume, administration.
Yes,
And 30,000, did you say, from housing?
that's correct. I believe, Mayor Ireland, that you did not record the fourth item, which was remove $25,000 allocation for emergency social services.
I had a note and I perhaps passed over that. All right, I appreciate that.
And I'm sorry to speak out of turn. And the last piece was that all of the savings from those measures would be allocated to reserves.
If I might ask, Councillor Butler, based on that last comment in particular, are you proposing these as reductions then, or simply reallocations? Because it seems to me if they're to be allocated to reserves, there has to be money to allocate. The money must still be in the budget, just not spent for those purposes, but reallocated to reserves.
That's correct. My point in making that provision is that I am not proposing a reduction in the tax requisition for this year. I am proposing only a reduction in spending. And I am also recognizing that probably some of those amounts that I have referenced may have allocations to reserves within them. But one of the difficulties we face in our budgeting process is that it is very difficult to see where allocations are made to reserve. So that's why I'm just saying whatever is gained by making those changes should be allocated to reserves. I recognize it may not be $240,000 in straight dollars that go into reserves.
Right, yes, I understand. Just hoping to add clarity that a motion to approve doesn't change the tax requisition.
That is exactly my intent.
Yes, thank you for that. Councillor McGrath, did I see your hand?
No, sorry, Mayor Ireland. I am deep in thought though about these requests, and I'm not that I'm trying to avoid dealing with it today because I believe that this should have been dealt with long ago. I don't think administration would be able to answer the questions that I have on these specific items today. And I see value in a separate budget workshop. If we're going to take these things out, I need to know the impacts on the residents of Jasper. I don't have that information today. So I'm not going to be able to vote in favor of reducing these amounts today without knowing very well what the impacts are to our community.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Mr. Gibbon?
Thanks, Your Worship. To Councillor McGrath's point, I would say that administration could speak to some of them, but I would suggest that we didn't have any advance notice of these items, and so we are not prepared with full details. I know a number of them have been discussed previously in March when I was here, I believe in November when I was not here. I know specifically, for example, emergency social services was something that was explicitly and specifically discussed at the Committee of the Whole meetings in March, as an example. But I guess overall, my understanding of Councillor Butler's motion is that the money should still be collected from taxpayers and saved within the municipal savings account. So in the 2021 year, the effect of this motion, as administration understands it, would be that we would still collect the same amount of money as is proposed in the amended budget that came from committee of the whole, just that we would, I guess, operationally do different things with it or less things with it. So, and I just want to make sure that I've got the clear understanding that the intent of the motion is that the administration should still collect these tax dollars, just not spend them. And so for Councillor McGrath, that's administration's interpretation of the motion as it's presented. And in terms of details, we could do our best to try to present council with some information here. And I don't know whether it would be to council's real benefit, as a number of the ideas that are proposed to my ear, at least, such as the reallocation to support in the daycare area to low-income families. Administration doesn't have a definition at this time of what those low-income families are. It sounds as though the motion proposes some programs that administration would need to develop over time. And so there would need to be a number of decisions made on some of these items. If the motion passed, we'd still have to make programming decisions subsequently, because again, the administration has not been involved in scoping out this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I'd like to respond to Councillor McGrath's concern with respect to questions to administration. I am every single one of these measures, every single one of these line items has been subjected to questions in the committee of the whole or at other times. There is nothing, no items that I am suggesting here that have not been queried and suggestions made, or I'm sorry, questions asked and answers given. At one point, questions are asked and they have been answered. All of these items we have asked about, and all of these items administration has provided answers. My problem is I'm not convinced by some of them. There's one exception to that, which is the proposal that the daycare allocation be allocated to qualifying low-income families. Mr. Given is right, of course. There would have to be some program developed for that, but I don't think it would be difficult to do. It is relatively straightforward. It's the kind of programming that is used by all affordable housing organizations where a family's income is considered, a line is drawn, and those most in need receive the funding. So there would be challenges there, of course. And does it represent a change in the way we operate? Yes, it does. Why? Because we're in COVID and it's a really difficult time for those lower income families. And I think my rationale is clear. But I don't agree that there is a need for more questions. We've asked a lot of questions, answers have been given. It's time to make decisions.
Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Demota.
Sorry, I disagree, Councillor Butler. When you pull out $70,000 from the emergency management department, the question is, where is that? What does that affect? And that answer is not here. Please enlighten us. $70,000. Where exactly does that? How does that affect that department? $60,000. Where does that? How does that affect the culture and rec? It massively does. And the questions will need to be answered. I haven't heard those answers. I'm not comfortable in just slashing that money out. Honestly, for us, it's a whim. You've spent the time researching it, sure, but you've put it on the table to make these cuts today, or not cuts, but you're pulling money out and squirreling it away in reserves, so less spending for sure. So you're collecting the same amount of money, but not spending it. Unfortunately, it does affect those departments, and I do support Councillor McGrath in needing to know how that's going to affect them. And I'm definitely not going to hear it from you. We have to hear it from the department heads. who have to manage the reduction. So this isn't just cut and dry. It's not one motion as proposed. It's going back to the drawing board and coming back with the answers of how that really does affect those departments.
I will let Councillor Butler respond, and then I'll turn to you, Councillor Demota.
To Councillor Wilson's point that he hasn't heard the answers. The answer was given in the committee of the whole meeting. I questioned that increased allocation. There is $90,000 of increased allocation into 2 line items in emergency management. And I'm afraid that the answer was essentially, well, that money is needed for emergency management. And I think that when we increase the operating budget by that amount in one department in 1 year, taxpayers expect to know exactly what the money is being used for. And it was asked and answered. I'm unconvinced. We did. That is the reason that we had those committee of the whole meetings. And again, if council isn't convinced, let's defeat the motion and move on. I am not here to draw out conversations. Don't vote in favor. And we will pass a budget today.
Councillor Demota.
Well, I just, again, you know, the fact that we're having these debates and there's lack of clarity around everything is just another justification, in the sense that there is so much ambiguity throughout this whole process and within the changes. And again, it might be a product of things that, you know, we didn't have control over, but we're here debating them because there's lack of clarity. And I think the steps that Councillor Butler is suggesting here are prudent steps. And if we go through these debates again and step by step to get the answers, which already have been answered, I don't know where we're just gonna keep going in a circle. So for me, I think if you want to go through this by each one, we can. I do have a question for one of them. So if we're ready to discuss them line item by line item, we can. If not, then I do want to ask a question about Councillor Keller MP's thought, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I see that you have your hand up anyway. Behind the $40,000 from council towards the whatever the $40,000 from council to use for communications. I think that we have some history on that one, and I just wanted to see what your thought was.
I did bring this up, and I did apologize that I missed the operation job in that morning. I did come that afternoon. So I like my history. So this weekend I did go back through all of our budgets from 2018. And of our last council, HR at the time recommended that we put, I can't remember, was it $40,000 or $50,000 into the council budget. And within that council budget, we had clerical help should Mayor Ireland ever need it, because we've been very lucky with Mayor Ireland that because he is a lawyer and we very seldom need to have additional help for council because Mayor Ireland does a lot of his own work, that one of the ideas was that we had this $40,000 or $50,000 to draw from. So our budget in 2018, when it was presented, was $299,717. Now, over the last 3 years, 4 years, so we're into our 4th year, we, the first year or into second year, we use administration in the past, used that money for the PHA study. I think that money was used last year, not last year, the year before, for the rec study that council wanted. But that money was still there. And I remember questioning in 2019, when the communication officer's position came up, should we move that money? And I was told by administration, they were considering that. But when I look at page 13 of the budget printed. In 2019, we had just over 302,000. Council managed in 2020, because obviously we didn't use that money, at $247,000. And in 2021, we are proposing that we have a budget of $314,000. I don't think in 2021, we need a budget of $314,000. One, we're not using that help. Two, we are not traveling. There is no reason that 40,000 of our dollars can't go into reserve for to be used later should it be needed. Because none of us are traveling, none of us are going to FCM, none of us have gone to AUMA. I haven't gone to any of my meetings outside of town, as have any of us because of COVID. So I really think that we, as a council, should be able to reallocate at least $40,000 of our budget into reserves. That, Councillor Demoda, answer your question?
It does. And you know what? And to have an example like that and addressing one thing, and you know, I'm sorry to go back to our capital budget, but we had similar debates and we came out to such a good conclusion. So you know, if we break these down and go, I don't think that any other councillor right now, well, maybe I can't, that's a justifiable argument. And I'm willing to vote in favor of moving into that, moving that money. So whether it goes to a specific, I think that there was a discussion of moving that to a specific position, but you know, it's a good argument. So are other people against that? Do other councillors agree or not agree that we're not going to be traveling as much? That money was put there for us to use for council support. Things have changed. We're in COVID right now. We don't see a lot of traveling happen. We're not going to AUMA, all these other things. So that's a valid point. Thank you.
Mayor Arda, may I just address one other thing?
You may, you had your hand up, and then I will go to Councillor McGrath and Councillor Journeau.
Just on the 70,000 on emergency services and like 25,000 for the report. I don't have an issue if that's needed. Where I have the issue is that if $25,000 is to write a report, once it goes into the operational budget, it's there forever. It just doesn't come out. So to me, if that is moved into reserves and it needs to come out for a report in 1 year, then it's taken out for that. But again, with the explanation of emergency services, we didn't get details what it was used for. So is it needed for 1 year or is it needed for operations in the long run? So if those type of things can be clarified. So if we're keeping the tax envelope where it is and we move that money into reserves, the motion says at the very end, if I'm right, Councillor Butler, that administration can come back to council and ask for that money with more clarity. And I think the problem is some councillor feels there's not enough clarity on these expenses at this.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hempy. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much. I have a couple questions. First of all, it's a question of clarity. If this recommendation that has passed from Councillor Butler by way of motion doesn't remove this from the tax envelope, we still have the motion that's required at today's meeting to pass an operating budget for 2021. And I suggest that we move that forward. My question in regards to the $40,000 removed from the councillor budget, I completely agree, Councillor Keller-Hempy or Deputy Mayor Keller-Hempy. That makes logical sense. It is not being used. Why wouldn't we? We as council have asked for increased communications. It's something that is really important to me. I would gladly allocate $40,000 from the council budget to our communications position this year and see $40,000 go into reserves for the future. the context of the $24,000 for the ESS, that's not a report. The $24,000 for ESS is emergency social services. So when a disaster strikes, such as the disaster that has struck for the last year, it requires manpower, and that manpower is the emergency social services. So it's thinking about the people or the social side of an emergency, and that is what the $24,000 request is for. So it's for human resources to manage emergency social services, which I understand very little of because I'm not in that line of work, but it's so important, as we've noticed this year, the amount of residents that have needed support throughout this global pandemic, never mind something as catastrophic as a wildfire happening in our community. It's needed support, it's grassroots support, and it's support that's needed for the everyday citizens and residents of our community.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Journeau and then Councillor Demota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are getting into the details and we're forgetting the intention of Councillor Butler's motion. The increase in the budget from year to year in spending is over $1 million. That represents 12% taxation increase if we didn't have COVID protection. I don't think the public would be very happy with that. So what Councillor Butler is asking for is to reduce the amount of increased spending. I see somebody shaking his head there already. Can I finish, please? And it's still going to be a big increase in expenses, and we're trying to reduce it. And the taxation envelope doesn't change. We're going to put the money in reserves. I'm not sure that, I just have to remind us that the increase here without this motion would be substantial. And I don't think the public of Jasper would accept that. So I fully support Councillor Butler's motion. It's to reduce the amount of the increase, not to decrease. Thank you.
Again, I think Councillor Demota was next, but just to respond, Councillor Journeau, I interpreted the motion that is before us differently. It is a motion, I think, to reallocate funds from those specific items to reserves, but that would not change at all the amount of the increase in the overall budget. It would remain the same. It would just redirect the funds from those specified purposes to reserves. And so the budget would remain, I think, exactly as it is. And if that interpretation is correct, then I have a question for Mr. Given. Is it possible, valid or legal, for us to pass a budget now with the number that was previously confirmed and continue the discussion about the reallocation of these items into reserves? That is, people have, it appears, legitimate questions. Can we accomplish both ends? If the intent is the reallocation of the funds, can that follow the budget, or must it be part of the budget? And I leave that to you, Mr. Given, but Councillor Butler may want to address it as well, because it is his motion and he would have a sense of what his expectations were. And then I promise, return to you, Councillor Demota.
Your Worship, yeah, just to be clear, administration's understanding of this motion is that it would collect exactly the same amount of money as the motion that was previously on the table from the Council Committee of the Whole. So it's actually not proposing to change the amount of money that's collected from taxpayers. And so that was my my reaction before. You know, with respect to Councillor Journeau, my apologies there, but I do want to make sure that it's very clear that administration's understanding of this motion, which we just heard for the first time today, is that it will collect the exact same amount of money as the motion that council forwarded in March, that was at the April 6th meeting, and that was at the meeting today at the start. So this motion would collect the same amount of money. It doesn't save taxpayers anything. So just so that we're clear on that point, it still proposes to take that money, to collect that money from the taxpayers. The difference, I guess, Your Worship, to your question about if the motion isn't proposing to change the amount of money collected from taxpayers, and really what we're talking about, I think, are operational considerations. For example, the discussion about the council budget line item. If council wishes to, by policy, say that you are choosing to restrict all of your travel for the 2021 year and have and approve no council travel, but that really is an operational decision that council could make at any time. It does, of course, have a budget impact, but it is an operational decision. It appears that many of the, and so I think many of the items that Councillor Butler has highlighted are things that council could do over the course of the of regular council committee of the whole and council meetings, and we could identify those items and bring them forward with more detail for council, because in the end, again, if my understanding, and Councillor Butler, I'll look to you, if my understanding is correct on this motion, you're not actually proposing to reduce the amount of money collected from taxpayers. So that's really what, I mean, at a very basic level, council passes a budget and says, here's how much money we need from taxpayers, X dollars. And then after you've approved that, you move on to operating for the year, and you run, and throughout the course of the year, council makes many, many operating decisions that have an impact in the year-end results. And I think many of the items that Councillor Butler highlighted are those kind of items that will have an impact in the year-end operating results and would lead to the municipality being in a surplus or a deficit. And I think Councillor Butler's intent was to have these monies go into reserve to handle that sort of surplus or deficit discussion. But to be really clear, we would collect the same amount of money from taxpayers as in the previously proposed budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler, you did have your hand up earlier. I will acknowledge you to respond to that. And then I will go to you, Councillor Demota. We've got off track. I appreciate that I've kept you waiting, but I think that Councillor Butler deserves an opportunity to respond.
Thank you very much. I simply want to confirm Mr. Given's statement that my intent here is to reduce spending in the operational budget by $250,000 and not to reduce the tax envelope and to put the difference into reserves. My goal here is to reduce spending. I think we are, with this budget, that we are spending too much. It's really that simple. My tactic, if you will, of bringing forward these specific suggestions is brought forward in the spirit that many times we have had discussions around the concept that when council wishes to reduce a budget, it needs to say where it wishes to reduce that. So I'm trying to be constructive in that. And we keep coming back to the questions of reserves. And I do want to respond to Councillor McGrath's point about emergency social services, that is money that is needed to provide valuable services to the community in the event of an emergency. And my response is yes, exactly. And that's why that money should be in reserves, because you can't spend it twice. It seems that we feel we need to spend $25,000 every year on emergency services while we are not in that emergency. And while I accept the need to be prepared, I don't find that to be valid. And I'm going to point out this. Last year, we spent $25,000 in emergency social services, and we have a note on our documentation saying that that money was taken from reserves. I have chosen not to delve into this, but I don't know why and how it was taken from reserves. But the good thing about putting money into reserves is that it's not supposed to come out without conversations with council. The difficulty with putting money into an annual operating budget is that those things don't come back to council. And as I've said many times, once it's on the operating budget, it tends to be there to stay. What we need to do is reduce spending. That's entirely the spirit of my motion.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. Councillor Demota, I thought it necessary to confirm for all that precise point that this is not about the amount collected, it is about how it is spent and how it is saved. And we were, I thought, maybe leaning a different direction, but I turn it to you now, Councillor Demota. You have waited patiently, and the chair will now recognize you.
Thank you. Can everybody see my screen share?
I can see it. Presume
Okay, so is it expanding as I'm expanding it on my screen?
It was jumping around.
Okay, so, you know, this is what I want to get back down to. We didn't have this net tax envelope presented to us. So for the viewers out there and other people that are entering into the debate, this is the November 2021 net tax envelope. That was the proposed net tax envelope with everything condensed into this page, which I referred to as page 38 from last year. So when you look at the bottom lines over here, with the total tax-based budget, in November, we had $8.4 million come out of the net tax envelope. That is what the proposed idea was that we would collect from the community. So when you look at the dollar increase from the overall budget from 2019 as proposed, it was $447,000, which in the next column represents 5.6% increase. So when you look at that number, it's like, okay, it's somewhat palatable considering, you know, what we've been going through. So that number has drastically changed. So Councillor Butler is making reference to the increase in spending in the overall departmental expenses. So when you look at the expense area, this is November. It's drastically changed to this year. And what I think is being addressed is that once you put that money into a department or the overall expenditures budget, then it's really hard to take back. And whether some of this stuff might be like one-off for this year, you know, next year's increase will be even higher. So the number that we see over here in the second last column represents an entirely different number that's on the table. And because we don't have this particular document, is causing a lot of frustration and misunderstanding. And I think if we had this in front of us today and we were able to circle the numbers and discuss what is actually being debated and decreased as far as expenses go, then would be an easy understanding, because that 5.6% in the furthest column would look more over 12,000, or sorry, 12% overall. So if you look at palatability from the public going, well, we shouldn't be expending to that amount, I think that's an entirely different discussion. So I'm sorry that I'm not entirely clear. Like I said, a lot of these debates are, you know, around some ambiguous figures, and I think that Councillor Butler, what he just said, makes more sense to me than just going to pass a budget that doesn't have a lot of clarity behind the increase, and that's just my opinion. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Is there any further debate on the motion? Have we lost Councillor McGrath? There she is. Before I call the question, is there a request from any councillor to split the question? Okay, Councillor Wilson?
So just to clarify, we're voting, the question is the total 250,000 reduction in spending to be put into reserves. So if you don't feel like certain amount should come from out of any of these departments, this vote would then be to take out of everything. Sorry, I'll pass it over to Councilor McGrath.
Yes, thank you. I will turn to Councilor McGrath. But my intent in the question is we can vote as a block. So there are 6 items plus at least one direction, maybe a second direction to direct the funds to reserves, or we can do them one at a time as council may choose. Councilor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Is the precise wording in the motion is it still to consider? So is this, as Mr. Given stated, suggested that it goes into reserves but can be revisited at a later date?
I think that it was the previous motion was a motion to consider these specifics, which motion was passed. We are now have considered these specifics. But my take on it is that if we vote in favor, then it will implicitly, at least, and I think by direction, be a direction to administration to leave the collection amount alone, but reallocate these specific sums totaling $249,000 from the previous spending to reserves. That's my understanding of the motion. Of course, I don't have it in written form either, but my best recollection when it was presented is that is the nature of the motion. I think Councillor Butler and Mr. Given have the same understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you. I am ready to take my statutory opportunity to make closing arguments. However, I'm not sure we're there yet. So that was the reason for my hand being up. I can clarify a couple of things that were mentioned, but as to the intent of my motion, but I would do so only while summing up. So not sure whether other councillors have.
There. And before I got to the point of calling the question and inviting you to close, I want to be clear whether it is, as you might say, an omnibus motion or whether we are going to separate it into specific questions, because that, well, it makes a practical difference, but it makes a procedural difference as well. Councillor McGrath.
Procedurally, I'm curious if Councillor Butler might like to recommend that Council approve the 2021 operating budget as amended, and further have bullet points as individual points that we can vote on individually as removals from that, or as removals from expenditures and to be placed into reserves, specifically worded the way that he has it worded. But I'd like an opportunity to not have to object and oppose this entire motion, because there's pieces that I see value in. However, I don't see value in it as a whole. So I think we still need to do our business today of approving a 2021 operating budget. And if it was possible to have these as subcategories beneath that motion to individually vote in favor or in opposition of.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. I think we can approach that from 2 routes that take us to the same point. And I think I can accept your remarks as a request to split the question. We could go through them each and then still have, at the conclusion of that, a motion to approve a budget, by which time we will know which funds are being reallocated to reserves and which funds are being left to be spent as postulated in the budget. So I think we can go either direction. I'd leave it to Councillor Butler whether he would accede to your request to a friendly amendment to approve an overall budget amount and then deal with the reallocation as separate items.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor McGrath, for the suggestion. I'm not sure I understand it, but I think the suggestion is that we pass the budget as presented and deal with this request to reduce the operating budget by $250,000 of spending. And my answer would be no, I can't vote for the budget with the size of the operating budget as presented. So that is my reason for bringing this forward. As to splitting this question, I am not hugely opposed to it, but I am concerned that we will dig ourselves into a line item by line item series of debates, which in the end take us to the same point. I'd like to point out this. My motion reduces spending in the year, but it allocates the difference to reserves. I would like to point out that administration always has the opportunity to make a request of council to move money from reserves into any area that it feels is needed. I would like to point out that last year that seems to have been done with respect to the emergency social services allocation of $25,000, though to my recollection, it in fact didn't come to council. So my understanding of the process is that while my motion would impose specific reductions within the organization, they are within the operating budget of the organization. They are areas that that administration can approach council to address through reallocations from reserves. That's what reserves are there for. We don't often get involved in conversations about allocating from reserves to the operating budget, but it is possible and it can be done. So I am disinclined to split the question because I don't know what position it'll leave us in. For me personally, I can't vote for this budget unless the spending is reduced by about $250,000. 200,000 might do it for me. But if we don't come up with a way to reduce our spending by that amount, I fear we will be back right where we were 2 weeks ago, which is with defeated motion because the spending is too high. So if council wants to split the question, let's have a motion to split the question, and then we will have to go through, I guess, 6 individual items.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor DeVota.
Okay, so I just want to discuss a point of clarity here, and if administration is available to walk through this with me, just so that everybody's understanding, because Councillor McGrath had pointed out that, made reference to the budget. So we need to know what we're actually discussing here. So if we go back to 2019, our overall expenses, and this is what has been reported, is $20,757,000. That is before the utilities, right? So in November, that number for the proposed 2021 budget was $20,311,000. I would like to know if administration has that new amended number for 2021. What's the overall, with that amended proposal that we have, what's the number?
Your worship, Councillor Demoto, can you just sort of reference where you're getting the 20 million? I'm sorry, I just need a little bit of an opportunity to catch up with you there. Right. So for 2019, when you look at the overall total expenditures from the municipality, it was $20,757,000, 477. So, and when we received our proposed budget in November, the increased number, or the change in the number, was $20,311,000.
So I want to know what that number is today with the amended proposed budget, because we don't see that in front of us.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity, Councillor Demota. Yes, you don't see that in the budget package that's in front of you, at least in part as referenced previously during the Council Committee of the Whole, because Council prior to the end of 2020 dealt with utilities budget separately. And so as I referenced—
This has nothing to do with utilities. What is the proposed expenses for 2021? The current proposal. We don't have that number. This is outside of utilities.
Okay, so I believe that number would be, and I'll actually just let me confer with Ms. Malinchuk just to make certain that I've got it correct in the information that I've got here. Just a second, Your Worship.
Thank you. Sorry if I've put a wrench into this. Should we take a 5-minute
No,
recess?
thank you, Your Worship. I
Okay.
have the answer to that question right now. It is $21,139,314.
Sorry, so could you repeat that? 21 million.
$139,314.
Okay. Okay, so that is from the change in November. It's almost $1 million difference. So if we could walk through, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So in November, the tax base budget within the next tax envelope, what was proposed to be requisitioned at that time was $8,429,000 and $8.429762. The new number today is $8.8 million.
That is correct.
Okay, and then so I would like to know the number difference right now. Actually, I could do that. Okay. Do we have a new dollar increase for 2021 from 2019? I'm trying to do that, but it's not, my calculator's not working properly.
Well, Councillor Demota, I guess you are 100% correct that the difference is essentially $1 million over the 2019 number. That number has been consistent, whether it's $1 million on the 20 million to 21 million or 7.9 million to 8.9 million. It's still $1 million, and so that number has been consistent since presented in March.
Okay, and what's the percentage increase in that number? 2021 over 2019.
Over 2019, that would be found by dividing the 2019 number by the 2021 number. And we can do that for you in a second if you let us pull out our calculators.
So part of my frustration is that we've gone through, people say that we've gone through this, we've gone through this, we've gone through this. Some of us say we have new information that's nearly a month old, but the fact that we don't have this right now in the palm of our hands in front of us when we're having a major debate and discussion about our taxpayers' money is frustrating. So if people saw well, once we get the percentage number here, this is what we're talking about. So the main argument isn't about what we're collecting as taxes. It's the palatable increase to the overall budget. And if that was in front of us, this is the number and the percentage that we've been discussing, because that's always been the case. And before, in past budgets, when we've seen proposed increases of over 6, 7, 8%, people lose their minds. So if we're looking at something over 12%, which is a change in at least 6% over what was proposed in November, and we don't have super clarity on that, I'd rather decrease the expenses and then come out with and have that money go towards reserve. And then if that money is needed, then have just major discussions about that. Because if administration's unclear and council's unclear, we have a major issue here. And I think some of that is communication.
Yeah.
I'll wait till we get that number back, and then I'm done talking. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and so Councillor Demota, thanks for the question. Yes, I think you're correct. It's about 12%. And again, that number has not been hidden. Going back to the unamended document that council first was presented in March, you saw that the easiest line to look at is likely the total municipal tax support line that shows 7.982 in 2019. And in the document that we presented to you in March, it showed just over 9 million. I think that's a pretty clear and transparent demonstration that there is an increase. The difference between this and what you saw in November was the administrative recommendation and strategy of utilizing the most monies to blunt the impact of that on taxpayers in the 2021 year. That is something that you did not have last fall. And so my understanding of the last fall numbers would be that taxpayers actually would have received a substantially larger tax increase because they had to make up for the difference of the reduction that council approved in 2020. So it wouldn't have just been that 5% or 6% property tax increase. It actually would have been close, much, much greater. And so administration came forward to council with a strategy of how to mitigate that substantial impact from the emergency action that council had to take last year. And so aside from that, you do have to discount that most money off of the top because it is a tax credit. I guess the most relevant number is the one that could be found on page 14 of the most recent budget document. And it shows pretty much straight line that $1 million increase over the 2019 year. That has not been presented any differently throughout the process. And my understanding is that Councillor Butler's motion actually doesn't propose to change that.
All right, thank you for that. I want to return to the motion that is before us. Councillor Butler was inquiring whether it was an opportune time to close debate. I believe that I can accept that I heard a request from Councillor McGrath to split the motion. I will ask Councillor McGrath to confirm that. If that is the case, well, go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I would favor seeing this motion split if the rest of council was also in favor of that.
Well, there is the difficulty. As I interpret our procedural bylaw and the schedule, a request from a councillor is sufficient. It does not go to a vote. And that is the way I would interpret section 14 of the relevant schedule of the bylaw. So if there is a request, my ruling would be that that request is operationalized. We split the motion. I think that it follows the particular reading of that section of the schedule is that when a motion is lengthy, complicated, or contains a series of independent issues dealing with different subjects, a councillor may request that the motion be split into parts so that each part may be voted upon individually. It could be argued, I think, that it does not deal with different subjects. The subject is all a question of reallocation, but it is reallocation from different department budgets. So I would be prepared to rule that it is an appropriate request for splitting, but I also draw council's attention to section 10 of that same schedule of our bylaw, and certainly leave it open to anyone who wants to challenge the ruling of the mayor. Any councillor is entitled to do that, and that is not debatable, but it does require a vote by council. So if there's an issue about whether or not we ought to split the motion, I rule that we can, and upon request I shall, but I advise you all that my ruling is certainly subject to being challenged. You may wish to do that. And as I say, that is a motion which is non-debatable and is put to an immediate question. So I am going to propose, because these are interesting procedural issues, that we take perhaps a 5-minute recess and people consider their position. If anybody wishes to challenge the ruling of the mayor, you're welcome to do that. We probably all need a bit of a break, and then we'll come back and see how we proceed with posing the questions, whether individually or as a whole. So I will call we have the time here. It is 12:20. I think everybody probably needs a bit of a break in any event, but we'll call a 5-minute recess and reconvene at 12:25. Perfect. All right. I will call us back to order, and just to recap then, my ruling is that with a request to split the motion, I would rule in favor of that. And I open it to anyone to indicate that they wish to challenge the ruling of the mayor. If I do not hear a challenge, go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I do not wish to challenge the ruling, subject to this question, Mayor Ireland. When a question is split, my question is around speaking for and against the motions, summing up as the mover having that opportunity, and further debate and clarifying questions. So I am not against dealing with the questions individually, but I'm wondering, Mayor Ireland, your view, when the question is split, are we then dealing with 6 independent individual motions, each of which can then be debated subject to clarifying questions, opening and closing statements from the mover, and so on? Because, and my reason for asking that question is I have made the point that I think that all of these questions have been, fully fleshed out, asked and answered. And I do fear we may be here all day. And so I'm wondering how that ends up when we have a split question.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Butler. perhaps regrettably, I take the view that each motion is an independent motion, and it is subject to debate and the typical rules, opening and closing. I am hopeful that there has been sufficient general debate that we can limit individual debate, but I think because it is a motion, it follows the rules of all other motions, and I am required to allow an opportunity for debate on each motion as it is split. And I recognize that it could be a lengthy process, but I see no option but to do that, which gives you many opportunities to open and close.
Well, thank you very much. If I may, then I won't oppose. I do agree with your interpretation of our procedures bylaw. I will make this commitment. I will sum up my arguments for all of these now independent motions in advance and simply reserve my right to sum up independently, subject to what is brought forward, because I think we have well and truly discussed these issues fully. So when you're ready, I will sum up my arguments for all of these motions collectively.
All right. Interrupt me if you think that I have misinterpreted that final remark. So with respect then to splitting the motion, the first motion would be that $70,000 from the Emergency Services Department budget be reallocated to reserves. And again, Councillor Butler, is that a fair encapsulation?
It is, Your Worship. What I actually meant to say is I would like to have the opportunity to present a closing argument that will apply to all of the motions.
Oh.
And it would be my wish to not present a closing argument to each and every one, but I'd like to sort of reserve that right so that if there is debate, I can do that. But I will present closing arguments for all of these now, if your will, and hope therefore then that we can move fairly quickly through these. Are you amenable to that?
I'm amenable to that. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Council, I thank you very much for taking the time to consider this. And while the motion is complex because it deals with specific departmental allocations and in some cases specific line items within those, it is a really simple motion with a really simple outcome. My view is that the net operating deficit in this budget is too high. I am convinced by the arguments made by administration as to the need for the relatively high tax requisition this year. I am completely convinced by the strategy of using the most funding to cushion that blow, but nonetheless, I cannot vote in favor of an operating budget with nearly, well, it's something like $960,000 of new spending year over year relative to 2019, or about 12%. It's too much. So this is a motion specifically to reduce spending this year, and only that. I can be happy with a budget that reduces spending over what was proposed by about $350,000. And I'm speaking only in rough numbers. We accomplished $100,000 of that in earlier conversations. For me to be comfortable, and this is just my view, we need to reduce another $250,000 or so from the net operating budget. I want to point out that the majority of the funding I am proposing we remove is funding that was introduced into the budget since we had conversations in November and December. So in that respect, it was funding that we had not specifically looked at and did not specifically look at until about a month ago. And so I respect that had I had my ducks more in order during our committee of the whole conversations in March, maybe I would have had the wherewithal to bring forward some of these suggestions in a more convincing manner at that time. But I did not yet, and none of us did know the outcome until really we had an opportunity to look at it collectively after those amendments were posed. The last thing I want to say is there has been quite a bit of conversation today around the presentation of the budget, the manner in which the numbers are presented, whether the percentages are there or not. And I feel that I want to separate my, clarify my motivation here. My motivation is only to reduce the spending. I, in fact, have found all the information I needed by looking in our budget documents. I know what the increases are. I know where they are. And where I'm not convinced about why they are there, I am raising the issue. But I have to say that while we can and should improve the way budgets are presented in the future, and we have seen those changes some changes over time, I'm not particularly challenged by that. And I just want to say that this is not about, oh, well, I'm unhappy with the way the budget was presented. I'm just unhappy with a number that I think is too big. And therefore, I'm making this proposal to reduce what will amount, if all of these measures are passed, to $249,000 in reductions in spending this year. And all of the funds retained will be put away where I think they belong, into reserves. And then that money is there for the community to use as it sees fit as we progress through and out of this COVID crisis that we're in. So thank you very much for what I acknowledge was destined to be a fairly long conversation, but I believe we can come through it today. And that is all I have to say at this point with respect to the 6 motions, I believe, which will come before us. And I will happily clarify the wording as needed, Mayor Ireland, as we progress through these.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. So again, the first motion is the reallocation of $70,000 from the emergency services budget to reserves. Any further debate on that question? Councillor McGrath and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. It's not debate. I'm uncertain, and I have already admittedly came ill prepared to this meeting today. I am uncertain of what that $70,000 for emergency services is for.
I'm not sure to whom that might be directed. Councillor Butler, I presume, although I thought it's just a general reduction. They will have that much less to work with is my understanding, but if I'm wrong on that, I would turn to Councillor Butler for clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's $90,000 of new allocation in the emergency measures and emergency management lines in the emergency services budget. Those two, that is $90,000 of funding that was not there in the budget documentation that we were looking at in November. I did ask during committee of the whole questions what the funding was for. I am not going to attempt to speak for others by repeating the answer, but I will say that beyond the fact that is listed in line items that say emergency measures and emergency management, for me, there is not enough specificity, and there was not at that time enough specificity offered to convince me that such a radical one-year increase is at this time in these circumstances justified. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Well, I think in the midst of a global pandemic, I think that some pretty massive increases are warranted. Although I'm not the expert, and I'd like to hear from the Director of Emergency Services on how that would affect this year going forward.
Your Worship, if I may, I can speak about it in general terms, but for all council members, I would acknowledge the intent of Councillor Butler's motion. And my approach would be that if administration feels that a program or service that is highlighted by Councillor Butler needs to continue in 2021, then we would come forward to you in a regular council committee of the whole meeting with a report identifying the details of the program, identifying the need for the program, and requesting that council fund that program through reserves. Councillor Butler's motion proposes to apply these monies to reserves. And so essentially what administration still believes our best advice is that all of these things should go forward. I appreciate that the practical application of this motion means that we'll have to come and prove it to you. That's okay. And I know that my administrative team is confident and comfortable in proving the value of these programs. And we can do that when we are well-researched, well-prepared, and when all council members have had a chance to read the information in advance, rather than being put in the position of having to make off-the-cuff decisions without full information in front of them. So I actually am not going to call any of the directors to speak to any of the programs. I think the point of Councillor Butler's motion is to say, keep this money in reserves, and if administration needs it, they should come and tell us why. And my team is fully prepared to come forward to you and to justify why something needs to happen. And then it will be up to council to decide whether or not it should happen. But I don't think it's fair to you, to the public, or to the other members of the administrative team to have we would not give you good information if we were attempting to do each of these off the cuff today. I would far prefer that we took our time and presented well-researched and well-presented cases through a regular council committee process. So Councillor Wilson, I hope that's, I'm speaking to management's approach rather than the specifics of that program, but I hope that's acceptable to you and the rest of council.
Thank you for that. Any further debate on the first motion?
Great.
Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not adverse to this direction, although I do feel kind of surprised and with my back up against the wall, having to make these decisions today. Well, we did have the opportunity during committee of the whole meetings to make these motions, and unfortunately, if we made those motions or we have to ask those questions at greater length, we would have directors available today to answer these questions, and not being able to hear from any director today, it would make me vote against every single one of these motions. Whereas if I had opportunity to ask questions and find out where Councillor Butler wants to take money out of each department, then I may vote in favor of it. But in the situation that I'm in now, I feel a bit misled, a bit cornered, and that being said, I'm not in favor of any of these motions.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any further debate? All right, I am going to call the question on motion number 1, which is a $70,000 reallocation in the emergency services budget. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. The next motion is with 3 opposed. The next motion is with respect to a $60,000 reallocation in the culture and recreation budget to reserves. Any debate on that? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. So in previous council meetings, we've discussed the importance of culture and recreation for our community. And we've also discussed, I think there's differing opinions of being able to have cost recovery for services in culture and recreation, and also a frame of mind that there will never be cost recovery in culture and recreation. User fees as it stands today are already astonishingly high. It's highly unlikely that most of our residents can make it to the pool today at the cost that it is. And it's highly unlikely that our residents can make it to the climbing wall at the cost that it is. And at some point in time, that cost has to be borne by the community and by us as council by allocating more dollars to those services that are important. They are important in recovery, they are important in community resiliency, and they are important for the social lives of our community members. I really value culture and recreation, and I recognized last spring when culture and recreation wasn't available to the residents of Jasper how impactful that was to their everyday lives. And I don't want to vote in favor of something that makes it harder for Jasperites to recreate.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Any other debate? Councillor Butler?
Thank you very much. The budget that we were looking at in November had $2.6 million of net operating deficit for culture and recreation alone. The budget presented to us in March had $2.7 million of net operating deficit for culture and recreation alone. This is so far from being about cost recovery that cost recovery is not even part of the conversation. I have never, will never advocate that we need to try to operate our culture and recreation facilities on a cost recovery basis. But there is, depending on how you calculate it, because there's some other items in there in that budget like museum, but there are tens of thousands of dollars more net operating deficit in this budget than what the department was apparently expecting to be forced to work with. I will not say that they were happy about it, but they were forced and prepared to work with in November. There has to be some point at which we say enough is enough. We do have funds available in reserve to address needs with respect to COVID, and I do understand that the community values those services, but I don't believe that an expectation that the department be held to what we were talking about last November means that there will be the need for radical cuts. It will be managed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any further debate? Right, I will call the question with respect to the $60,000 reallocation of funds from the culture and recreation budget to reserves. All in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried with 3 opposed. The next motion is the reallocation of $24,000 from the CFS budget, but related to daycare. And Councillor Butler, you'll have to confirm, was it an aspect of that motion that those funds be then reallocated from reserves on the basis of a program that targets those in greatest need?
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. We have already laid groundwork for using the COVID relief reserve to assist people who most need it. And I believe that a very big part of our thinking in that assistance program would be to help deflect, defray, or defer fees charged by the municipality. So there has been some conversation about, for example, utility fees where businesses or individuals are in a very tough position to afford to pay those. The same applies to daycare fees, which are fees charged by the municipality for a service that the municipality chooses to provide. My concern with a large year-over-year increase to the allocation to daycare is that it doesn't go to the families who most need it. It simply goes to top up the operations of that program. And to date, I think we've all decided at least that we're satisfied enough with that program. program, but under these circumstances, I think we need to do better. And so my thinking is that that money should go right back into helping to defray daycare costs for families who most need it over the next year. And that's why I've specified it specifically rather than just saying, oh, let's put it into reserves. I think we should commit to using it to help families in need who need daycare service but find the fees to be unaffordable.
Thank you. Detail of its future use is captured in the motion. So it's a little bit unclear perhaps in wording to administration, or will be reallocated for relief, but to be targeted on the basis of a program to be developed to assist families with greatest need in the community. Any further debate on that motion? Councillor Journeau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The specificity of this motion by Councillor Butler is something that I've supported before, and I will support this this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor McGrath?
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I agree with Councillor Butler and Councillor Journeau that there is absolutely a need for assistance for childcare for everyone. And I specifically note that I am speaking to everyone. Just because of your income status doesn't mean that you have the ability to pay the prices that daycare could get to. I believe that we do have a program, as Councillor Butler suggested, that was suggested by administration about 4 weeks ago and shown to council the possibilities that can arise from a program such as the $500,000 allocation from the most funding and the impacts such as utility fees that Councillor Butler discussed that can really assist renters, that can assist small business owners, that can assist parents with childcare. We have yet to discuss the merits and the program, and we have directed administration to come forward with some ideas for programs that we could use in the community with that $500,000. I think more specifically, we allocated $750,000 in that fund. Therefore, I believe there is greater potential than $24,000 to impact daycare families and families of low income within our programs and within our reach. I believe that if you take this $24,000 and put it into reserves specifically for very few families, it will leave the rest of the families paying more than they already pay, which for many Jasperites is unachievable and impossible with their current earnings. We need more women and more families back in the workforce that are currently staying home in this global pandemic. And we must allocate governmental dollars. And if it's not coming from the province, and if it's not coming from the feds, it's got to come from somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Keller-Hantke?
I support this motion for the low-income families. A lot of them need the help, but also I think to put it into reserve for that now, I think the federal government announced yesterday that they're putting, I think, $2 billion into daycare, and they're going to be working with the provinces. So rather than it coming year over year on us in our operating budget, I think putting the money into reserves, working with it throughout the year and see what the province and the federal government is going to come forth with some more funding. I think it's all going to come forth here in the next couple of months, and I think there'll be even more funding for our daycare. So I do agree with, for now, putting this funding into reserve for our lower income families.
Councillor Demota?
I appreciate all that Councillor McGrath has said and did consider much of that. And I'm just glad that she worded it. But I'm still in the same position as what Councillor Kelleher MP just stated. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it's like we're not taking the money away. Right now, it's to reduce the overall expenditure, because once you increase budgets, it's really hard to take back. So right now, I believe this is a pragmatic approach. We're not taking money away from families, or you know, we might be providing some services to other families in need that might not have had access to it last year. We're not entirely sure, but I think that there's an opportunity to set something up. And you know, we were elected to make decisions. Some of them are hard, and some of them you know, are going to be easy. This one's definitely a difficult one, but at the same time, I think an overall exercise of prudence is necessary here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeMota. I will take an opportunity to speak to this motion. I have been silent, and I will again be silent. But on this one in particular, I acknowledge the intent, but this is truly a zero-sum game to benefit some. I don't see any other rational explanation for that, and I accept Councillor McGrath's take on that, that yes, we can assist some who are undoubtedly in need, but it's going to be at the expense of others who also use the service. I think overall, all of these arguments compel me to the need to increase reserves, but not necessarily to decrease.
Richard, your sound is glitching on everybody's.
So I have been somewhat opposed. Well, I've been opposed to the motion so far, not because it's not a really good idea, in my view, to be cutting spending. And this is one example. Oh, my apologies. The issues I've been experiencing, but I will repeat only that it is a zero-sum game, and for some to benefit, others are going to lose, and I cannot support that. If there is no other debate, all those in favor? I see hands up. Those are in favor of the motion? Those opposed? I have turned off my camera to hope that my audio improves. I recorded that vote as 4 in favor and 3 opposed. Did others get the same?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion is carried. I will keep my camera off for a bit. That may help. The next motion is with respect to reallocating $25,000 from the Community and Family Services budget, specifically an amount identified for emergency social services, I think, and to reallocate those funds to reserves. Debate on that particular motion. Councillor McGrath.
I'd just like to mention that the importance of ESS, and I'd like to also mention that I am not an expert in ESS once again, that the importance is in the preparatory work. So it's the work that gets done now ahead of time to plan for the entire community, including things like, remember the maps that we received and it showed the check stops, and at these check stops, you could pick up your neighbors or vehicle share or carpool with others. The social impact of a disaster when it strikes requires planning. And the planning doesn't happen when the disaster strikes. The planning happens in advance of any disaster possibly happening. And being a community that is progressive and being a community that is forward thinking, it is important. We all understand the threat of wildfire in our community, and we have a very obvious threat that is currently exploding in our community, that is this global pandemic. And it's really important to think of the social side of emergencies as they happen, and they can't be planned as they're happening. They have to be planned in advance.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
I agree, it's very important, but I've been on council 8 years. And since I've been on there, we have a new plan every year. There's more money poured in, there's more money poured in, and there's more money poured in. I get that they have to be kept up to date, but $25,000 of new money, shouldn't it be part of somebody's job now?
Any further debate with respect to the motion with the reallocation concerning community and family services? All right, I will call the question, and then I will quickly turn on my camera so that I can have a recorded vote as well. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. 3 opposed. The next motion is a reallocation of $40,000 from the council budget for support for the Communications Commission, and as I understand it, an offsetting $40,000 from administration budget to reserves, which was otherwise allocated for that position. Is there any debate on that motion? Councillor Butler.
Thank you. And for the benefit of council, I'm also turning off my camera. My device is telling me that it's running out of battery, even though it's plugged in. So I'm attempting to somehow reserve power. I wanted in this motion to suggest reallocation of the entire amount of the new money. It's $67,000 or something, because my personal view is that there is overlap in the organization. When council decided to add a position for communications, it was not necessarily council's intent to grow the communications function in the organization by that full amount. My view is that there is overlap, that the CFS department has some of its own communications facilities and functionality, and I think it's better off being centralized. But Councillor Keller-Hrampe has suggested a really good option, which is that we do have money in the council fund, so let's use that. That takes care of $40,000 of the $60-some thousand of this allocation, and that satisfies me that we are showing responsibility by funding at least the majority of this position internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any further debates on this question? Councillor McGrath.
I fully agree with the allocation of $40,000 from the council budget towards the communications budget for the communications position for the 2021 year. However, next year in 2022, this will be $60,000 or $40,000 that we'll see in growth in our 2022 budget. So does it serve a purpose when we're trying to trim things down? I'm not quite sure because we'll still see it as an overage next year, but I do see the value in this, and I do think that it was a very smart motion to bring forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Councillor McGraw, we shouldn't see an increase of that 40,000 back to council unless council at the end of this year, when we bring back the HR proposal for numeration for council, whether we add it back in or not, because that was added in at the request of the human resources in 2017. So the budget was built by that 40,000. It has been used, as I said, for the PHA study and our recreational study, I believe. So it's just sitting there. So every year it just goes to reserve anyway. So this way we are putting it really to reserves.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hrampe. Any further debate? I will say then that I would prefer that we simply direct the $40,000 from the council budget into reserves, if that is the intent. If there is a communications position, it does not belong with council and funded by council. It is going to be a continuing position. It's going to have to find a home. I don't think its home is in council. We achieve exactly the same end, I think, by leaving the budgetary amount where it is, but achieve the end that Councillor Butler is looking for by taking the $40,000 from the council budget and allocating it directly to reserves, which to me makes perfect sense. And it is in fact how we have operated in past years. It's nice to have that fund available when it's needed for various studies. It can be in reserve so we can address it as a one-off each time it's necessary. But to the extent that it's connected to a position, I can't see the sense of leaving funding for the position in the council budget where it does not belong. So with that one change, I would be inclined to support this, but I don't want to confuse the home station for this position with funding from the council budget. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Mayor Arlen. My intent is, with this motion, is that we would remove $40,000 from the council budget and allocate it into the, wherever it is, the legislative services budget to fund most of the communications position. Not at all that the communications position would somehow reside within or under council or within the council budget. And I would see that as at the discretion of future councils, an ongoing allocation. So therefore, we would be starting from, council budget would be starting from $40,000 less than it is now for future councils to consider, of course. So I'm not sure if I addressed the point that I think you were making there, Ireland. Thank you.
Just so I can be clear then, and I may have misapprehended the motion initially, but the reallocation from the council budget would be to the administration budget for that purpose. And if those funds are not now in the administration budget, would they then go into reserves?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, okay, understood. Thank you for that clarification. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Down, I just did not see Sorry, I've turned off my camera. I called the question, but I did not see any response either in favor or opposed from Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I was opposed.
Thank you. That motion is carried. 2 opposed. And so it comes to the final motion, which is with respect to a $30,000 reallocation from housing. Presume that's in the administration budget.
Your worship, it's in the operations budget.
Operations, thank you. So a reallocation of $30,000 in the operation budget, itemized for housing to reserves. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor McGrath had her hand up before it was called to question.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I know it's difficult to chair right now with the technical difficulties. I'm not positive, once again, without my information in front of me, what this municipal housing 30,000, like, would this take away staff housing that we currently are using? I just need to understand more what this municipal housing $30,000 is.
Your worship, I can very briefly comment on that. And again, I would just reference that if there is additional need for this, we can bring back to council, and would expect to bring back to council exactly why. My recommendation is, my recollection is that this is mainly due to increased costs at Cottage Clinic. I know that there's also decreased revenue for the fact that the Cabin Creek House has not been rented while it's under renovations. And so there's a couple of factors together. There isn't a position per se or increased expenditures per se. It's a combination of factors. And if we end up short in that area or we have something specific, we'll come back to council for approval. So for example, the increased costs at Cottage Clinic, council can expect to see a report coming to Council Committee of the Whole with a recommendation that you fund that and that the funding source be reserves. So again, I think it's a couple of factors together in that housing line item.
Councillor Butler.
I'll defer. I think Councillor McGrath maybe wanted to follow up.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Thank you, Mr. Given, for answering that curiosity that I had. And I am under the understanding that these would be reasonable expenses for the municipality to experience, and therefore I do not support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Butler, go ahead.
Thank you very much. There's 2 aspects to this suggestion for me. One is, as I stated, and I have brought forward on a number of occasions, my concerns around lack of policy. And this is one of those areas. As far as I can tell within the organization, we have almost no policy around how we plan, how we are managing municipal housing and how we plan to manage municipal housing. We only have a little bit of it. And I think that when we see expansion year over year in a budget, it causes me concern because I do not see a policy context and framework in which to contextualize that increase. So that's part of the reason that I have concerns here. The second is exactly what Mr. Given referred to, which is really that we kind of here come down to the question of what belongs in operating budgets versus other areas of budget. And this is exactly one of those cases. So if we have one-off, one-year concerns, if we have pieces of infrastructure or facilities that need work, then to me, that kind of money shouldn't sit in an operating budget, which is essentially a year-over-year operating budget. If we had, as we have seen in past years, an operating budget with some forecasting into the future. So if we could see anticipated numbers, say for 2022, so we could say, oh, well, I see that's sort of a one-off, then I might feel differently, but we don't. So exactly as Mr. Gibbons said, this doesn't mean we don't fund the concerns that are there within municipal housing, but I would prefer to see it coming to council as a question rather than being simply included in the operating budget. So I just wanted the opportunity to make those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any further debate? All right, I will call the question on the 6th motion, the $30,000 reallocation from the operations department budget. All those in favor? Opposed? There are 2 opposed. That is carried. I think that gets us through the motions. Councillor Butler, I recall when you first introduced your motion many hours ago, it seems, there were perhaps 2 directions at the end. Have those all been captured in the split motions that we have dealt with, or was there something outstanding?
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. The only additional piece was that I had stated that without reducing the tax requisition, allocate the differences in all those now dealt with motions to reserves. I suppose I would ask Mr. Given if adequate direction has been indicated by the 6 motions, or with respect to that or any other outstanding question that Mr. Given may have in mind as to what our intended outcomes were here, if administration has got everything it needs.
Thanks, Your Worship. To Councillor Butler's question, administration would interpret these motions as all being, again, the redirection of those funds into reserves. I think we'd sort of append that to each motion rather than needing another motion. I think that was a pretty clear understanding by all council members. We discussed that a couple of times specifically. So I don't believe we need anything additional. If council is comfortable with the idea that administration would highlight that each of those motions was to make the change specific to the program or service area, and that the funds be redirected to reserves. Aside from, so yes, I think we've got everything that we need.
Councillor McGrath. Oh, I'm sorry.
And if I'm clear, Mayor Ireland, there is currently no motion on the table to approve the 2021 operating budget as amended.
There is not.
May I please make that motion, because I have stayed up for 32 hours for this purpose.
That is greatly appreciated, Councillor McGrath. The motion, though, then is, well, I suppose it has been further amended. So the motion that we would be voting on today, although the amount might be the same as the motion that was defeated, the amendments are different because we have just, so I'm prepared to say that it is not a reconsideration. It is a slightly different motion because the budget has been amended. So then your motion would be to approve a budget as amended and showing a net municipal tax envelope of $7.9 something million, or pardon me, Now I've forgotten what the amount was from last year or last motion, but again, recognizing the need for some certainty about what it is that we're passing, I would like to attach some number to your motion. Councillor Demota?
Well, I was just going to say, as amended by council today, and then that would break down the numbers, because I think the overall intention was not to affect the requisition, and the discussion was around the overall budget. We're accepting the budget today as amended by council. But that's, I don't want to put words in Councillor McGrath's mouth.
That's exactly what I meant, Councillor Demota.
But then again,
Councillor,
too, sorry, we don't have enough.
Councillor Butler?
Thank you very much. I would like to submit the suggestion that passing a motion to, that dealing with a motion to pass the budget as amended is probably adequate. Even to say right now what the net tax envelope amount would be, might be difficult. And that the specific and final details of that question comes to us when we pass the tax bylaw. So I believe that we could do more harm than good by trying at this point to attach numbers. While I understand all councillors wish to be as specific as possible in the wording of the motion to have numbers attached, I think we all know what we're dealing with, and that it really in the end all comes out in the tax bylaw.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. I will direct a question, I think initially then to you, Mr. Given. If I put the question as proposed by Councillor McGrath, that Council approve the 2021 operating budget as amended April 20th, 2021, is that sufficient for your purposes?
Yes, Your Worship, it would be. Administration has been tracking all of the amendments that have been made by motion. We have that summary of amendments that were made previously during the Council Committee of the Whole. We have all of the motions that were made today, and so we would see the final motion being the budget as amended, being inclusive of all of those different amendments, including the ones made today. So we are comfortable and can work with that.
All right. I will accept that as a motion then from Councillor McGrath. Is there any further debate on that motion? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be able to speak in favor of this motion. The changes we made brought the net operating deficit for the coming year of operations down to a level that I think I can support and that I can speak favorably to when challenged by the public. And believe me, those challenges, as we all know, are ongoing. I want to say one thing only as to how we got here, and that is to respond to the question that some councillors felt themselves to be, put in a difficult spot or cornered, or in some other way surprised by what was put on the table here today. And I think it's really important to point out once again that we had extensive conversations about all of these things in Committee of the Whole, and that's what Committee of the Whole is for. And that, sorry, could I just collectively ask councillors to mute? I'm getting quite a lot of background noise here. Thank you. I want to make this point. And the motion to pass the budget as was presented was defeated 2 weeks ago. So I think it was pretty clear that we were going to be facing some questions about how to massage the budget to get it to a point where it would be passed. So while some of the specific measures I acknowledge were not known, but all of these are issues that have been discussed. So I don't think that anyone was cornered or lacked information here. And I really appreciate everyone's efforts to engage in a healthy debate and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any other debates? All right, I will speak briefly. I hope I too am in favor of the motion and will vote to support it. I want to again acknowledge the preceding debate on the motions, and I do thank Councillor Butler for the way he approached it. But the discussion itself, I think, may and should take us back to a look at our own processes. And even though we would have, I think, legitimately waived notice, there is real benefit in council understanding and seeing written motions in advance to reflect on them. And I make no suggestion otherwise. This was done properly, but there is a real value, I think, in our notice provision. And it may have been reflected today. And I also really appreciate the emphasis on the difficulties with incremental budgeting that came to light in the discussions throughout this budget cycle in particular. And I hope that we make use of all of those lengthy discussions to lead us in a different direction, or the next council in a different direction for determining budget, because incremental budgeting is difficult, as is, of course, sort of one-off budgeting. But I appreciate the work of everybody that went into this today. Thank you, and thanks to administration. If there is nothing further to debate, I will call the question. All those in favor of passing the 2021 operating budget as amended this 20th day of April 2021. There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you all. We have a budget. Councillor McGrath.
Sorry, I didn't mean to leave my hand up, but I will take this opportunity to excuse myself from the meeting and get on the road home to Jasper. Thanks everyone for a really, really great meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Drive safely. All right, we are now approaching the 4-hour mark. We will need a motion to continue before I entertain that. There's not much left on the agenda. Do we want to push through, see if we can conclude in 4 minutes and then have a quick adjournment to come back for the closed session that we require on the FOIT matter? We all fine with that? All right, I will continue. Accounts, or the Government Alberta letter regarding Seniors Week is in the agenda item 9, correspondence for information, consideration, or action. Do we have any motion with respect to that?
Your Worship, I'll just speak to it briefly. That was at Committee of the Whole last week. It is a request from the government for a proclamation. I think we just need a formal motion from council to approve.
Councillor Butler, prepared to make that motion?
So moved.
Thank you. I will assume that there will be no debate. If there is, indicate quickly. Otherwise, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you. Other new business for council? Councillor Butler.
Thank you. I want to take 30 seconds to speak to what was raised earlier, and I apologize. And that is the question of notice. You know, I have to say I had in mind what I hoped to accomplish with that motion in advance of last week's Committee of the Whole meeting, and I actually had a conversation with, I think, Mr. Given and Mayor Ireland about bringing it forward at committee of the whole. And I didn't do that because I simply did not want to prolong conversations and have conversations where we already had, but I could have provided written motions in advance, as Mayor Ireland pointed out, and it might have eased the conversation a little bit. And I'm just so in favor of notice where it can and should be given. And so for that, for not having provided the wording or at least the gist of my motion in advance, I do apologize for council. It certainly was not my intent to take anyone by surprise. I basically thought we were in the conversation and we were dealing with issues already on the table. So I have to apologize for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any other new business for council? Councillor reports. I will report briefly and I will follow up at another time. It is not opportune now, but I did attend the AUMA Municipal Leaders virtual conference Wednesday, Thursday, Friday last week. Some significant issues addressed there, including, for interest, a change of name and a change of branding for the AUMA to be revealed at the virtual convention in the fall. So that will be interesting, but otherwise we dealt with a number of issues that will have some impact at this year's election, including issues with respect to a pledge, or at least a proposed pledge for candidates to take, which revolves around respect. But I will bring more back later. As I say, this is perhaps not the agenda to deal with that. Are there any other reports from councillors? Seeing nothing, agenda item 12. We have an intergovernmental meeting coming up with Parks Canada, May 4th. I will alert council now that I have a scheduling difficulty that has arisen for May 4th. I'm not sure of my availability. So whoever is in the chair as deputy mayor at that time, prepare yourself. May 6th is the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce general meeting on Zoom at 9 o'clock. And Thursday of this week, not shown, I believe now Councillor McGrath is going to attend for the Pride flag waving and give some remarks. That happens Thursday. I'm not sure of the time. Probably about noon and typically on the apron at the fire hall for those who might want to socially distance. 12:30 I see is a note. Any other upcoming events for which council ought to be made aware? Seeing none, might I have a motion, please, that this meeting extend beyond 4 hours, and that can be followed by a motion that we move in camera and then we can debate when we come back. Councillor Demoda, you are making a motion that we extend beyond 4 hours. Thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And could I have a motion then that we move in camera at 1:32? Councillor Journeau?
Yes.
Making
Yes.
that motion. All in favor? That is carried. There are none opposed. So we will move in camera, but I think we might all need a bit of a break. Would it be too rush to say that we reconvene at 2 o'clock?
No.
Sorry, I'll turn that off.
I was going to
recognizing
suggest
that-
1:45.
1:45, please.
Okay, do we have concurrence? I can make that work.
Yep.
All right, 1:45. I will see whether I can
Yep.
mend my machine and come back to you in better shape.
Are we getting a new Zoom link?
Can administration?
Yes, I will send a new Zoom link to council members immediately after we close this.
Thank you.
Thank you. My thanks to those members of the public who have stuck through us with interest for the last 4 hours. Thank you all very much. We'll be back next week as committee of the whole. Thank you all, and council, I will see you all in Mr.